So today we're going to be ranking all 200 Rabbit&Steel loot items. Yes, there's 200. Yes, it's a lot. We're going to try to blitz through it. I've already done this technically before. I just didn't post it on YouTube because it wasn't actually that good. I did the first one when I had only like 60 hours in the game. Now two things have changed. I have like 140 hours in the game, and I have Lunar mode solo clear. Lunar mode solo clear has changed my opinion a lot on items because you are going to be getting DPS checked a lot in Lunar solo. And so if you don't immediately get a good item off the bat, you aren't going to win. So it really separates like what is a good item, what is a bad item. I'll be ranking these across all characters. What I'll be mostly ranking them off of is their ceiling and how good they are when you get them. For example, something like Obsidian Rod has a ceiling of 1000 base damage. That's as good as the item is going to get. But you can also increase it with like Mountain Staff for 200% for a 3000 ceiling, which is crazy. But by itself, the most average ceiling you're going to get is going to be like the 1000 damage. And then if you actually don't have anything crazy going on, like you're just sniper running with Obsidian Rod, you're probably going to see like a 500 damage. How good is it going to be immediately? How good it scales up? Effectively like that. And like how hard it is to find items to pair with it. How good it is across all characters will be taken into consideration. Because most of these items are pretty generally good across most characters. It'll get special mentions if an item is like really good on certain characters, like Bleed being very good on Dancer because of multi-hit. Same with like Shadow Bracelet being very good on Dancer because of multi-hit. Black Hole Charm being very good at Dancer because of Emerald Special. Everything being kind of crazy on Dancer because of Emerald Special. You get the idea. Raven Glimmer Special Applies Curse is a 10% global damage up pretty much because you should be taking it on a character which has 100% uptime for this. How long does the debuff last? 5 seconds. So this is going to be a little worse than the other ones, honestly, but not by a noticeable margin. It gets B tier. If you find it, it is not going to carry your run by any means, but 10% damage globally is not awful. And since it's party-wide, it gets some saving there. Primary one is a little better. It is literally just the same thing, 10% damage up, but it's applied on primary, which you can use a lot more often than special. This doesn't have 100% uptime. In fact, it not having 100% uptime, I want to put it in C tier. That's where I gotta put it. 5 seconds does not work well on almost any character. It works good on probably Wizard, Dancer, Sniper. It works good on half the characters, actually. It can stay in B tier. Just because now when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, actually every character can find a way to give it 100% uptime, but it is not as easy as just primary every 5 seconds. Special every 5 seconds is a bit more clunky. Like if you find it on Ancient, much worse. Whereas this, I can't think of a single character who can't run this. Even Bruiser can run it, although Bruiser would have a little tougher time running it. Oh, this one is just a secondary. Yeah, secondary applies curse. Literally just as good as primary applies curse. Kind of depends on the character because sometimes your primary or secondary doesn't do damage, but yeah. Dark Magic Blade. Every 10 seconds, slices the air around you, dealing 300 damage and applying curse to nearby enemies. It's pretty much actually, it's better than those ones below it. Alright, I need to define what each tier is going to be. S tier is when you pick it up, it should immediately define your run. It should immediately make your run way, way better. And it should be consistently like that across every character. A tier should be I really want this across every character. It doesn't necessarily define your run, but it makes your run so much better and pairs so well with so many items that it's very, very good in a sense. It might not be universally good. There might be a character to its bad on, might be a situation you don't want it, but a lot of times you want to take it. This is going to be probably like big % damage boost tier. B tier is going to be like minor benefit, but pretty much always a solid benefit. Like oftentimes take it and I'm not too disappointed. Like a 20% damage increase. Is it going to help me reach the DPS check on a boss? Probably not. But it is a 20% damage increase, so you take it. C tier is going to be like it's doing some damage, it's helping you out, or maybe it's a defensive item that has like a really niche use case. It does have a niche use case, and so it's got like some level of play. D tier is there is almost no circumstance where you'd want this item. It's either too niche or it has a really weird condition to where it's like it's only good with X other item, but you would take it sometimes, and if you were forced to take it, you wouldn't like retch or anything. It just actually wouldn't help your build at all. F tier is it will actually be detrimental compared to most item choices. Like, it can literally hurt your run. And some of them in F tier won't actually literally hurt your run. They're just not good. And I'll explain why when we get to them. But yeah, that's the layout for everything. Next one is going to be Darkblade or whatever the fuck it's called. Yeah, Dark Magic Blade. Pretty much 100% curse uptime, so long as you're near enemies. The AoE on it is pretty good. Plus it's an extra 300 damage. Do I want it in A tier? I am not so certain. If it's in B tier, then these things need to go down to C tier. And global 10% damage is good. This is global 10% damage plus... So maybe A tier should be... Maybe A tier should be like percent damage increase. It's honestly very good. This is already a hard decision. This is going to be one of our first hard decisions. We'll see if it needs moved down later. I don't want to think about it too much because I can always move it down later. So, Witch's Cloak. Witch's Cloak, your secondary deals 10% more damage. Debuffs you place deal 70% more damage. Slightly increases movement speed. Secondary 10% doesn't matter at all. Debuff 70% can matter. It can matter if you have burn going. So the cap or the ceiling on it is a burn will get 70% more damage, and that is nice. If you have Ghost Flame or burn, it's awesome. If you have poison, 30 damage, 70% of 30 damage isn't that crazy. It's not irrelevant. It's almost double. It's not irrelevant. But like between 30 damage and 50 damage, it's not going to carry a run. It's not going to get you to a DPS check, and taking it is a massive gamble. To me, it only pays off the moment I get 2 burn items effectively. Maybe 1 burn item, it depends on the build. I would need like 3 poison items just for it to pay off in my eyes, or I would need 1 good burn item, 2 mid burn items. 1 Ghost Flame item could work with it. But on its own, it does literally nothing. So to me, Witch's Cloak gets D tier. I know it has a good ceiling, and I've tried to give it a chance. Trust me, I have gone through hundreds of Lunar runs, and some of them I'll be like, oh, Witch's Cloak is the first item? Let's take it. Sure, this character has a special that can afflict burn. The ceiling is just too high. It probably will pop off if you're able to keep it for the entire game, but there's also a chance it won't. Like, it does nothing immediately, and that's what really hurts it. Most items are going to be better, other than the 10% secondary damage, but no one really cares about that. So I have to put it in D tier. I think that's a good one. Crowfeather Hairpin increases special damage by 20%. When you place a debuff on an opponent, your special has a 50% chance of resetting. High B tier. The reset condition is a bit clunky, but it's still a 20% special up, which honestly matters a lot less in like Lunar mode, because 20%, it's a big damage up, but when you're doing solo Lunar clears, you need a very, very big damage up. And you kind of realize that 20% isn't that insane, but it's not bad. Next one is Red Black Ribbon. You deal 5% more damage when you place a debuff on an opponent. Your defensive has a 50% chance of resetting. C tier. Maybe D tier, but I think C tier is fine. 5% global damage is way better than like Witch's Cloak 10% secondary damage. 5% global damage doesn't really matter. It can reset your defensive, which is handy, and it's a lot easier to make this work than it is to make Witch's Cloak work. Although, no, actually, like thinking about it, it's probably below Witch's Cloak and D tier. Not to like be super mean to it, but it's just not going to help you pass a DPS check ever. And even as far as late game items go, there's going to be like one niche build where you want it, and that's to try to go invincible when you are applying like a ton of debuffs. Like, you're applying a ton of debuffs, so it would have a really high chance of proccing. Let's go invincible with it. All right. Opal Necklace. When you use your defensive, apply Curse to all enemies. This one is a 10-second charm. It's going to be just about as good as everything else here. This is going to be a little lower than this, little lower than Raven's Grimoire, just because you can't get 100% uptime, just like Raven's Grimoire. They're about tied, actually. 100% uptime is going to be difficult. You can get 100%, but it's just difficult. Let's see. Next one is Sleeping Greatbow. If I'm correct. Yeah, Sleeping Greatbow. 200 damage, 6-second cooldown. Fires a slow-moving projectile at your targeted enemy that does 200 damage. It's fine. It's nothing like crazy. It's fine. It's going to do some damage. It can help you get to the DPS check. It won't carry you to the DPS check, but the extra damage is noticeable. Like when I pick it up early on, I'm like, okay, this item is going to make sure I get to the DPS check along with my additive damage. These items are not going to help me get to the DPS check in any way. In fact, if I don't pick up a baller item after them, I will probably be dying. This one is like, all right, I can reach the DPS check with it. Am I going to be having a fun time? No. Crescent Moon Dagger is every 10 seconds, your secondary deals an extra 400 damage on hit. Roughly the same as Great Bow. I have a little more luck with it because the slow projectile can miss. That's about it. Lullaby Harp, every 10 seconds, resets defensive cooldowns for you and all allies. You can effectively read this as everyone has a global cooldown of 10 seconds. Well, not a global cooldown, but a cooldown of 10 seconds on their defensive, which is crazy. Wizard who has a natural like 20 on defensive, this is now a 10 second just because your ally picked it up. Pretty much every class benefits from this in a very good way. And it's not even like a bad item where it's like, oh, it increases your cooldown to 10 seconds. No, it's just a solid item. Definitely bottom of A tier. It's not an item you want to take like super early on, and in solo it suffers a little bit. But even on characters like Wizard, it now gives you 100% defensive uptime and so much defensive liberty. So it is very, very good. Nightstar Grimoire, every 25 seconds, deal 900 damage to all enemies. About the same as these. I might rank it a little higher because the high cooldown does have some synergy with a few other items down here. But effectively, it's like, oh, it'll help me reach the DPS check, but it's not going to do any major work. This item is also the same. It is Moon Pendant. Every 12 seconds, your special will deal 400 damage in a radius around you. It's worse than Crescent Moon Dagger because Crescent Moon Dagger is 10 seconds and it's on your secondary, which is a lot easier to get off. Although sometimes your secondary doesn't do damage, so, you know, can be kind of different there. It's fine. It'll help you reach the DPS check. I've been appreciative for it sometimes, especially in fights where AoE is necessary, like Tasha. It can be really nice because you can clip all of Tasha with it, so that's really awesome. Pajama Hat, defensive and loot cooldowns are shortened by 2 seconds. Feels awesome in theory, oftentimes falls short. Gonna put it low B tier. It's always kind of useful because it's all cooldowns other than special. Yeah, all cooldowns other than special. At worst, you get a defensive 2 seconds cooldown reduction. And that's not bad. That honestly isn't bad, but it doesn't actually end up usually doing too much. There's a lot of items that have cooldown, but 2 seconds doesn't really matter for many of them. Like Pigeon Bow, it can kind of matter there. Other than that, it doesn't super matter. If you're running like a bunch of these C tier items, it does amp them up quite significantly. That's why it's in B tier. It's always going to do something, and it does have a higher ceiling than most of these. There are some crazy builds you can go with it. It's very helpful to have, but I wouldn't say it's anything crazy, so it's low B tier. Stuffed Rabbit. Increases special damage by 20% every 12 seconds. Using your special will grant you invulnerability for 3 seconds. Start battle on cooldown. Want to put it low A tier, but it might be high B tier. So it is the same as Crowfeather, 20% increase to special damage. Special is very valuable. And it's going to give you invulnerability for 3 seconds. And I've actually found myself more recently playing around this quite a bit. 3 seconds is a long time. That is Heavyblade's defensive right there. You can effectively treat this as Heavyblade's defensive if you have it. And sure, the timing isn't always perfect, but if I'm coming up on an attack that I know is kind of bad, sometimes I'll be like, all right, let's hold the special for 2 more seconds, barely lose out on DPS, and then fire the special off right during that attack, invincible for the whole thing. Crazy useful. Other times it'll just save you randomly, but it's best if you're playing around it. Not to mention the 20% is always good. Next item we have is Nightingale Gown. Every 15 seconds, Omega charge your special. I'm putting this in S tier. This goes in S tier because single-handedly it can get you to the DPS check and clear it. It's kind of crazy. Omega charge is 3 times damage on your special. Almost every class wants this. Even Berserker, who only does like 100 damage on their special, that's still like 300 damage now. Is it crazy on Berserker? No. But on a class that can actually use it, which is pretty much every other class, it's absolutely insane. It's going to be a very quick way to start doing some massive burst damage. So easy S tier for me on that item. Pretty much always useful. Eternity Flute. Every 12 seconds grants haste to all allies for 5 seconds. So about a 40% uptime on haste. Haste is useful. It gives you 20% less global cooldown time, which is you can almost read as 20% more damage. Effectively, it plays out in a very similar way to Curse, except it is less reliable. But not that much less reliable to where I will still put it in B tier. Time Warp Wand, your secondary has a 40% chance of giving you haste for 5 seconds. Haste, again, is like a global 20% damage increase in most cases. Some cases it does not apply. I would put this also in B tier. It's not going to carry me to the boss or anything, and it's not even going to make like a huge impact, but it makes a significant impact. I guess huge is kind of weird. Chrome Shield, using your defensive, will grant you haste for 8 seconds. This almost wants to be A tier because you can almost keep the buff on permanently on a lot of classes. Trying to think of a class you can't. Like Dancer you can't, but Dancer it's 50% uptime. We're going to tie it here though, because there is a good margin of class where you can't keep it 100% uptime, but it is very good because it is consistent. You can choose when you get the haste, which is better to me. It's movement speed increased. Yeah. It goes in A tier because you can choose when you get the haste. You can be like, oh shoot, I need to haste right now for the movement speed, and it's great. And also a lot of times it unintentionally does it. For example, if you're defensiving through an attack, that extra movement step kind of turns it into like a mini druid, or I guess a bigger druid, because it's 8 seconds of speed increase, which is pretty huge. Next one is going to be Clockwork Tome. I don't know what they were thinking when they made Clockwork Tome, because it's kind of just better in Time Warp Wand in a lot of ways. Clockwork Tome, your special has a 50% chance of giving you haste for 8 seconds, which is kind of huge, because that's 3 more seconds than Time Warp Wand. A lot of classes can spam their special, but I'm going to put it in B tier because a lot of classes also can't spam their special. It is better than Time Warp Wand considerably. I'd put it right here. It is a global 20% damage increase, but it doesn't work quite as well as Chrome Shield in my opinion, because it's not going to help you in like any defensive scenario most times. So Metronome Boots will make all your global cooldowns 1.1 seconds. Some classes don't like this because some classes have cooldowns that are lower than that. Most classes get a buff from it though. Like Dancer's only going to get a slight buff, only like a 7% damage buff. In that case, yeah, it's probably like somewhere between C and D tier. But many classes like Heavyblade or Wizard get so much benefit from it because their global cooldowns are very, very slow. Additionally, it has a very high ceiling because you can grab it with a bunch of items here. This item, this item, this item. Let's see. Any other its? Okay, maybe just these 3 items, but it's still insane with these 3 items. There's a few that I think also work with it, but anything that increases your global cooldowns it's just good. Very, very good. Additionally, it's a moderately increased movement speed. So if you grab it on something like Heavyblade, you're now fixing your movement speed all in like one quick chutzpah, I guess. Chutzpah is a very weird term. Apologies, but yeah, you get what I'm trying to say. It's consistently good. Movement speed is a pretty big deal. Plus, it's just a consistent damage upgrade, and when it's a damage upgrade, it is a very good damage upgrade, and then it also pairs really well later in the run, though it won't necessarily carry your damage on its own in most cases. Time Mage Cap. Cooldowns less than or equal to 10 seconds become 5 seconds. On the right build, it's crazy. I'm moving these 2 down, though, and here's why. These 2, every time I'm like, oh man, these are going to go crazy, and they never do anything, or they just aren't relevant. What times do you want Time Mage Cap? It's not like completely useless like these 2, but it's like it's almost. My issue with Time Mage Cap is oftentimes the only thing it's helping immediately is your special. It'll make your special 5 seconds instead of 8 seconds in most cases, but it works the other way around. For example, Lancer Gauntlets gives you a 2-second cooldown on your primary and secondary. Usually does not matter at all. This makes it 5 seconds. If it's below 10 seconds, it becomes 5 seconds. So it's actively detrimental half the time, but it can be crazy the other half the time. When is it crazy, though, actually? When is it crazy? I'm trying to answer that question, and I'm coming up to a resounding fucking nothing. 5 seconds is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm really trying to, like, it's good with that. It's not fantastic, but it's good with it. It's pretty great. Yeah, it's fine. It can be like a 30% increase on special in some cases. In a lot of cases, if your special is like 8 seconds, 5 seconds is like a 30% increase. So it is good. It's just also a lot of cases where it's bad, and it's not going to necessarily carry you. And it has very weird stacking with everything. So just be careful if you take it. Not my favorite item. It moves down to there. For this one, 2 seconds just doesn't usually end up mattering. There's very few things in this game that are cooldown. Well, there's a lot of things in this game that are cooldown. 2 seconds just doesn't matter on like 90% of them. Defensive cooldown 2 seconds less also like somewhat matters. Only somewhat matters though. Just not that huge. You could convince me to maybe move it up, but when I'm picking between first items, I'm always picking these first 4 over these 2. I'm not going to lie. These 4 are way better than these 2 in a first pick. These 2 just have a slight edge as later picks. As later picks, when your build is established and you can say, oh, this is going to increase all of these that I already picked up, or, oh, this is going to increase these few that I picked up, then it's like, yeah, all right. That's where it pops off. Starry Cloak. Your defensive cooldown becomes 10 seconds, slightly increases movement speed. Pretty solid because you know what it does and it's consistently good. Most defensives are never going to get below 10 seconds, so it's not bad that it makes it 10 seconds, if that makes sense. Whereas this one, a lot of cooldowns are below 5 seconds, and that's why it's bad. This one, your defensive is never below 10 seconds. So it's consistently good. On like Wizard, it's as good as Lullaby Harp. But Lullaby Harp, again, that's why I said it has really good stacking. Lullaby Harp doesn't have this weird, like, it's going to turn your defensive into 10 seconds. Probably C tier as well. The thing is, it doesn't help you that much get to a damage check. It really helps on something like Wizard. On Wizard, that's like fantastic, awesome. On Bruiser, who cares? On Heavyblade, 5 seconds more defensive. Alright, that's cool. But it's just your defensive. Like, just don't get hit, lol. And I hate to say that, but your defensive isn't going to help you when it gets to a DPS check, unless you have an offensive defensive, in which case it is better. It's just like, I'm really thinking about it, and I'm like, 5 seconds on a Dancer defensive, how much does that matter? Probably a 10% increase to damage. Is it better than just having these? Not really. And in party mode, it's not that crazy. Gemini Necklace gives you a 30% chance of instantly resetting your defensive and special when used. Pretty crazy A tier. Up there in A tier, a lot of classes really appreciate it. Pretty much any class doesn't mind doubling defensive in a bad situation, and pretty much any class doesn't mind a double special. Bruiser double special, cool. Now you get 2 layers of Berserk to apply back to back. Heavyblade special, not bad. You can probably build into special with that. It's pretty dang good. Hexblade special, okay. Yeah, you're just not unclicking special. Your finger is on special, it will stay there for the entire game. Solid item, really easy to build around. It also helping defensive, it also helps in ranking a lot. Next, we got the Wind set. Hogfeather Fan reduces their special's cooldown by 2 seconds. Kinda sucks. Yeah, kinda sucks bad. I used to think, oh, for some case you want it. Oftentimes it is worse than Timage Cap, and it is definitely worse than Sleepy Cap. Most classes don't care about their special cooldowns in a lot of ways. For example, Dancer is going to be resetting it, so it doesn't matter. Sniper is going to be resetting it, so it doesn't matter. Wizard is going to be resetting it most times, so it can matter, but it usually doesn't matter. Heavyblade, it only matters if you're going for a special build, and even then, you gotta look, how much is a 2-second increase on damage? A 2-second increase on damage is honestly not usually enough to warrant it. It is at best a 10% damage, in my opinion. At worst, it does literally nothing for like half the characters. And it doesn't have like any crazy caps with anything. It's not like, oh, it's not like this one where it's like, oh, now I can do 400 damage on my secondary every 5 seconds. It's just kind of there. Not great. Used to think it was cool though. Windbite Dagger I used to sleep on. Your secondary's global cooldown becomes 0.5 seconds, but its damage is reduced by 60 seconds. I mean 60%. Apologies, not seconds. So, just doing strict math on this, the average secondary cooldown is 1.2. 0.5 seconds is about a 70% increase on global cooldown. So if you were to only spam secondary, then you are grabbing a 70% damage increase. Damage is reduced by 60%. Those about even out. I'm not going to lie, those about even out. It is not actually a damage reduction, and that is an important step to understanding Windbite Dagger. It is not reducing your damage, it is making you apply damage faster, and then it is reducing how much damage it actually does. Now, it's good for 2 reasons. One, there's a case where you have like debuffs on your secondary, or your secondary is going to charge you, like in Heavyblade's case. Heavyblade, you aren't using your secondary for damage. In fact, it is bad for damage. But by grabbing this, you can now quickly use your secondary and then get more time on your primary. It gives you more time to not use your secondary in a most general case. And then in a more niche case, you get something that overwrites its damage or applies like a debuff. For example, Ghost Flame secondary. These 2 can also work. They can override its damage to 100 or 250 respectively. yeah, it's as insane as it sounds. And then Timespace Dagger also has a very good pairing with it. Not to mention, there's also just like things like Darkbite knife, Darkstorm knife, where whenever your secondary does damage, it has a chance to do more damage. And when you apply all of those, you can actually turn this into a ferocious attack. If you can get something that overwrites the damage, because this has very low priority overwrite, this is overwritten by pretty much every item in the game. I mean, it's really good. Flat damage increases also work very well on it. It's just very good for pretty much any build, so it's getting a easy A tier. I used to not like it so much. In a worst case scenario, it gives you a very quick way to apply a debuff or a charge like bleed or something. In a really good scenario, you override its damage, and now your secondary is fucking popping off with it. So, pretty crazy. I do like that item a lot. Pigeon Bow. Every 3 seconds, deal 70 damage. It's fine. It's kind of worse than these, but it's fine, I guess. It does its thing. It doesn't have like a chance to miss or anything. It has some like cool interactions with this item specifically. That's about it. Can have some cool interactions with the Opal Wizard primary. It's not great. Every 6 seconds it does 140 damage, but it doesn't miss like Sleeping Great Bow. It's going to do less than all of these, but like it can still help me get to the DPS check. It's not going to be useless ever like these, so it's fine. I'll take it. It's just not going to help me get to the DPS check that much. Shinsoku Katana, your primary global cooldown has a 50% chance to be 0.8 seconds instead of its normal amount. I didn't quite realize how good this one is. I don't feel like its ceiling is quite as high as the dagger, but it is close. Effectively, for something like heavyblade, that is double damage on a primary because you can get your primary out twice as fast on a 50% chance. So 50% chance to do double damage? Hell yeah. Now, it's not that way for every class, but it's never bad for any class. No class is going to look at that and be unhappy. On Rabbit Luck, it's pretty insane. Arguably more insane than Windbite. I'll put it in A tier. I haven't ended up using it too much. Haven't had as much success with it as Windbite, but there is a lot of cases where it's going to be very good. Don't discount it. Very good stuff. Eagle Wing Charm. All of your abilities deal 20 more damage, significantly increases movement speed. Also probably going to be a solid A tier for me, but it's close to B tier. So with flat damage like this, it's good on multi-hit attacks. So like on Dancer, this is going to be more important than an actual 50% increase to your primary or special in a lot of cases. Not to mention significantly increases movement speed. There's just a lot of cases where you're going to want it. I feel like it has carried my damage more consistently than Crowfeather. Like, when I pick up Crowfeather, I don't notice a huge difference. It's like, oh, okay. Minor difference on DPS checking or not. I might still get DPS checked if my items aren't good. If I pick this up on the right character, it can be like S tier. All right, I picked it up on Dancer. Cool. Now I don't really need to worry about the DPS check. Plus, the movement speed is like a significant movement speed thing. Next item is Sparrowfeather. Whenever you do secondary or primary, you deal 50 damage to all enemies. Pretty good. As you can imagine with Windbite Dagger, crazy. Congrats. You just added a flat 50 damage to something that is attacking 2 times every second. So that's crazy. This becomes 100 damage every second, which is huge. Otherwise, though, it has a very high ceiling. What all does it scale with? It just scales with a lot of things. I want to put it high B tier, though. I feel like it's not as consistently good as these. Whenever I see, like, Shinsoku Katana or whatever it's called, I think that's what it's called, I'm like consistently like, okay, that's going to be a flat damage increase and it's going to be a pretty big noticeable one. Same with like this, which I know it seems kind of weird. On Dancer, technically, this is doing more damage per hit than this is. This is only increased by 1 item in the game. This adds damage to your attack, therefore now percent increases become way better on those attacks. Not to mention, this can affect your special if you build into it well. Therefore, it has an easier to reach ceiling, though not a higher ceiling than this. Sparrow's Feather is never going to be bad, and it's going to be a good damage increase. You're going to feel it no matter what class you're playing on, I feel like. But I don't feel like it's ever carrying runs unless you have a very specific crazy build on it. Next, we have Winged Cap. Grants a brief speed boost when your secondary is used. Moderately increases movement speed. It's kind of fun to use. That's about where it ends. Kind of fun to use. It's just a moderate movement speed increase, though. And then, like, you can use your secondary to get some like movement speed increase. It's not that crazy. It makes you kind of fast. You know what also makes you fast? This. And this does like more damage. So it's good. Thief Scope. Every 10 seconds, vanish for 3 seconds and grant a brief speed boost when you use your special. So whenever, and moderately increases movement speed. So kind of a lot in there. Effectively, after you use your special, you will be invincible for 3 seconds and a bit faster every 10 seconds. Plus moderately increased movement speed. It's fine. It's a weird territory because on a lot of classes, it doesn't work too well because you want to vanish before you use your special. Because you want to boost your special with the 30% damage you would get from Banish. In this case, it could be good on like a heavyblade build. Only every 10 seconds is kind of meh. It's not going to be a huge damage increase. It's more of a survivability thing. But you can use it as a damage increase. If I were to see it compared to all of these, depending on my build, if it was like a cool heavyblade build, I might take it. It's got some usage. These are one of the main... This next one is one of the main reasons I am redoing this tier list. I underestimated bleed a lot. Bleed is important. So, what bleed does is every time you deal damage, you do extra damage based on the bleed amount. So if the bleed amount is 20, you will do 20 extra damage every time you deal damage. Pretty good. Extra damage is reduced for allies hit. Don't have the calculations on that because there's not many calculations floating around on this game. But I would imagine it's not by much because I don't notice significant damage increases when someone else picks up bleed. If you look at this, yeah, your secondary inflicts bleed and it'll inflict bleed for 5 seconds and it is a 20 damage effect. It is effectively Inglewing Charm because one gives you 20 damage on all abilities. This one gives you 20 damage on all abilities when it's active. That's the reason Eaglewing Charm is much better than all the bleed abilities. Eaglewing Charm is always active, whereas this is a little harder to augment, and it's not always active, but it is still valuable. It goes in B tier for me. You could argue it into C tier, but honestly, on like Dancer or something with like a lot of attacks like Assassin, bleed is kind of huge. And this is 100% bleed uptime, just like these. If you ask me if I'd rather have 10% damage or 20 more flat damage, it's going to solely depend on the character and the build. That's why it's equal to me. Also, it's a little easier to augment than the 10% extra damage, in my opinion, because you can get something that like increases, like you could get Witch's Cloak, but again, 70% of 20 is not crazy. It's better with Venom Hood, which is coming up. This Bloody Bandage is just defensive, applies bleed, 10 seconds, still 20, about the same thing. It's not going to be 100% uptime like this, but it's close enough. Primary inflicts bleed, 5 seconds, same thing, 20 bleed damage. Pretty much the same. This one comes in a similar tier as Dark Magic Blade. Bloodhound Greatsword deals 380 damage, so a little more than Dark Magic Blade, but it's cooldown 12 seconds. This one inflicts bleed for 10 seconds, so it's almost 100% bleed uptime. Pretty dang good. That's why it goes up here. It is literally just these, except it is applied for the entire time guaranteed, so long as you're close to the enemy. On most classes, you should be kind of close to enemy if you have this. Work around it. It will treat you very well. And it does effectively a very similar rule as, hey, now I have 20 more damage on all my attacks, plus you get the extra 380, which is handy. Now we're out of the bleed territory, minus like one more thing. Reaper Cloak, your defensive additionally deals 100 damage 3 times to enemies facing away from you. Slightly increases movement speed. 300 damage whenever you use your defensive when enemies face away from you. Right around here, it's lower than a lot of these. So this is going to do 400 damage every 10 seconds. This is going to do 300 damage every probably 15 seconds. The average for a defensive is 15 seconds. If you get it on 10 seconds, great, but then it's only equal to this, so it's like, what the heck, man? So it's going to, on average, do a little less damage than these, plus it's only on backstab, which is just weird. Not too much of a fan of it. Bloodpower Brooch is interesting. Abilities deal 40 damage 2 times to enemies facing away from you. This means this is 80 damage. 80 damage every time you use an ability. Holy moly, that's almost double Sparrow Feather. Only on backstab, though. Granted, boss fights always do backstab. Second phase of boss fights, at least. The second phase of boss fights are always going to do backstab. So I put it about with Sparrow Feather. Because this one works on any of your abilities. It has a bit more niche there. Plus, when it comes to the later half of the boss fight, it is going to be strictly better than Sparrow Feather. That's about it. 80 damage is a lot. It can carry you to the DPS check as much as these, but it's only going to be in a pretty specific scenario, unfortunately. Wolfhood. Every 6 seconds when you use your primary, deal 250 damage to enemies facing away from you. Slightly increases movement speed. A little higher than these guys. It's not that helpful, but I admit, if you're playing it well, it does more damage than all of these. The issue is, usually you're not playing it too well, although it has 100% uptime when it comes to second phase of bosses. So, that's about it. Blood Vial, at the start of each fight, inflict all enemies with sap, which is just bleed. I don't even know why it's a different term. Well, sap is slightly different in the sense that extra damage is not reduced for allies hits. So it's a little different there. It's better for team play. Yeah, Blood Vial goes... It wants to go up there. It's pretty good. Sure, it's just bleed, but it's bleed for all allies, and it's for the first 60 seconds. Now, I will say, most bosses last like 200 seconds, so that gives you an idea of how long it's going to last. But it's a significant increase for the first part of the fight for everyone, so it is a very good team option. Just as good as a lot of these, in fact, a lot better than a lot of these, but it's only for the first 60 seconds. Next, we have the Assassin set. I like this set a lot. Black Wakizashi, your primary, has a 30% chance of dealing an additional 3 blows, dealing 50 damage each in a radius around your enemy. So effectively, 30% chance for 150 damage. It's fine. There's a lot of cases where, like, if you have rabbit luck, then yeah, it's crazier than all of these. If you don't have rabbit luck, it's fine. Honestly, it's probably B tier. It can help your damage significantly if you play around it, whereas these are very set and they aren't going to help your damage significantly. Black Wakizashi can help your damage quite significantly. It's just kind of hard to find a build that makes it work. But no class is going to take it and be sad. You take it and you hope you use your primary a lot, but if you don't use your primary a lot, maybe you have rabbit luck or you have like extra luck chance, or if you don't have that, well, it's still a free 150 damage every once in a while. You'll probably get it every 10 seconds. It's not awful. Let's see. Throwing Dagger. Every 5 seconds, fires a projectile at your targeted enemy that deals 120 damage. Cooldown resets every time you use your special. Treat this as 120 extra special damage. So on something that's spamming their special, which is most classes, it is freaking awesome. Helps you get to the DPS check a lot, although not as much as a lot of the other items on this list. It's about equal with a lot of these, actually. I wouldn't say it's as good as like Metronome Boots. There's a very big difference when you get past like Stuffed Rabbit, in my opinion. But on something like a spellsword, it's very nice. Even like Heavyblade doesn't mind it because it's like, oh, cool. Free 120 damage on your special. 120 damage is significant. Plus, even if you aren't using your special, every 5 seconds, 120 damage, not that much worse than Sleeping Greatbow. Pretty comparable to Pigeon Bow, honestly. It's actually really comparable to Pigeon Bow. In fact, it's better than Pigeon Bow. Just outright. Yeah, just outright better than Pigeon Bow, if I'm doing my math almost anywhere correctly. It's like, okay, I know it's comparable. Still, you get the idea. 120 extra special damage, or at worst, it's just a C tier random activated loot. Pretty good stuff. Assassin. Oh, and I should mention, it can get you to the DPS check all on its own. Like some of these items can, depending on the build. Assassin's Knife. Your secondary has a 30% chance of dealing an additional 2 blows, dealing 50 damage each in a radius around your enemy. So it is Black Wakizashi, but it does 50 less damage. If you're running a secondary build, you'll take it over Black Wakizashi. Otherwise, it's not great. If Black Wakizashi is bottom of B tier, this is probably a C tier, because on average, it is not helping my runs that much. Now, if I get it with Windbite Dagger, yeah, I'm taking it. That's not like a Assassin's Knife thing. That is a Windbite thing. So, yeah. Ninjutsu Scroll. Your special has a 30% chance of dealing an additional 3 blows, dealing 150 damage each. So that's 450 damage on a 30% chance. I like it a little less than the kunai because it's not consistent. If you aren't using your special, then it's not actually crazy. If you are spamming your special, it is a massive damage increase. So I'm going to put it top of B tier, because it's not as consistent as anything in A tier. There's a lot of classes that don't actually like it that much. It's only useful on a handful of classes, but when it is handful on those classes, it's very useful. When it's useful on those handful of classes, it's very useful, is what I meant to say. Regardless, it's not bad on any class, and it's a significant damage increase on most classes. Shadow Bracelet abilities and loot that hit more than once deal 30 more damage. Probably A tier for me. Maybe, probably A tier for me. Actually, high B tier as well. It can definitely be A tier depending on who you're playing, but when I actually think about it, not that many classes benefit from it that much. I think Druid really benefits from it because they're special. Obviously, hits multiple times. Hexblade benefits from it a ton. Dancer benefits from it a ton. Assassin benefits from it a ton. Even like Bruiser can benefit from it. Even Bruiser can benefit from it on their secondary. And so it's very good. What you should realize is this is 60 extra damage effectively because your attacks are hitting multiple times for this to apply. And if your attacks are hitting multiple times, that is 30 more damage per hit. So 60 extra damage on attack, 60 extra damage on potentially all your attacks, kind of crazy. Now, if you get something that does like 4 hits, that's an extra 120 damage. You can see how it scales, but an extra 120 damage on like a special, which is the only thing that is reasonably doing like 4 hits, unless you have like Defender attack or Hexblade attack, but those are very rare situations. It's only as good as Kunai at its best on a special. So that's where I put it in D tier. Ninja Robe, when a percent chance succeeds, erase projectiles around you and vanish for 3 seconds, slightly increases movement speed. Probably low B tier. It's not bad, and it actually has a unique synergy in the sense that a lot of times when a percent chance increases, your special goes off cooldown. That is the case for Wizard, and it's the case for Dancer. And yeah, that's kind of it, but it does have synergy there. Percent increases are very common in this game, though. And so going invincible through them is very, very nice because it's invincibility. Plus, it gives you 30% extra damage on your next attack, and it's a slight increase to movement speed. It is much better than Thieves' Coat because you can kind of predict when it's going to happen. Well, you can predict less of when it's going to happen, but it happens at a more valuable time, typically. And it can happen way more often than 10 seconds, and it usually will be happening more often than 10 seconds. Kunoichi Hood. Your abilities do 15 more damage. Your loot does 50 more damage. Slightly increases movement speed. Similar to Eagle Wing Charm, where it's like, this is a damage increase. 15 more damage is nothing to scoff at, especially for you multi-hitters. The loot doing 50 more damage is actually kind of garbage, though. Like, yeah, there's a lot of loot that does damage in this game. Most of it either doesn't care that much, or, I mean, yeah, that's the end of it. Most of it doesn't care that much. Every 10 seconds, an extra 50 damage on your greatsword is a nice little bonus. There's some loot where it matters a little bit more, like Crown of Storms build or something like that, but if you're running a Crown of Storms build, this isn't making it pop off. This is just making it a little better. Crown of Storms and another item are probably making it pop off. So it wants to go in C tier for me, but it is a slight movement speed increase, and it's a 15 extra damage on attacks. For most classes, that's not very huge. Like if you're playing Heavyblade, it's not going to carry you anywhere. But if you're playing Dancer, 15 extra damage goes a long way. Now, I'd much rather have the significant movement speed than loot does extra 50 damage, plus this is 20 damage, but 15 extra damage is 15 extra damage. But it goes in the bottom. It goes in top C here. There's not enough classes that use it to a good caliber. Shinobi Tabi. Shinobi Tabi is kind of a loaded die. Standing still will cause you to vanish for 5 seconds and resets your special. Available every 8 seconds, starts battle on cooldown, slightly increases movement speed. Movement speed doesn't matter too much, but it's a nice little benefit. So being invincible every 5 seconds for 8 seconds is invincibility 70% of the time. This can go absolutely crazy very quickly. Get time mage cap, congrats. You can now be invincible 100% of the time. So this is a very easy way to go invincible 100% of the time. But you probably aren't looking for invincibility, or you're probably looking for damage as an early pick. And this is still not a bad pick, because it makes you vanish, which makes you do 30% more damage on your next attack, and it resets your special. Resets your special is the huge thing. You can treat Shinobi Tabi as your special has an 8-second cooldown, but without any of like the bad things of, say, like, oh, my special now is permanently 5 seconds, which can be bad. Okay, that's never bad. I'm tweaking. Fucking put a bullet in my brain because that was a tweaking take. So Shinobi Tabi makes your specials cooldown effectively 8 seconds. For something like Berserker, this can be crazy. You wouldn't think it's crazy, but like, you're always enraged now. Congrats. For a lot of classes, this is crazy, especially because you can choose when that happens by just moving around a little bit. Like, for example, if you're playing Dancer, it's like, oh, I already reset my special a ton. Sure, but if you're getting a really slow reset, stand still for a moment. 1, invincibility. 2, movement speed. 3, 30% more damage. B, reset special. Too many cases, this is just fucking crazy. It does so many things just on its own and pairs with so many different angles, and at worst, your special is now 8-second cooldown, and it does 30% more damage. Like, that is good. It is almost S tier. Like, it is crazy good on a lot of classes. Next one is Rockdragon set. Dragonhead Spear. Your primary is 40% more powerful, but gains a cooldown of 3 seconds, also slightly reduces movement speed. Pretty solid high A tier. So this is obviously only good on primary builds. Primary builds can be a bit wonky and definitely aren't for everybody, but they are for Bruiser and Heavyblade. Unfortunately, Bruiser can't use this. 3-second cooldown is not tolerable on Bruiser. Every other class doesn't actually mind a 3-second cooldown very much. For example, with Heavyblade, cool, you have a 2-second global cooldown on your primary, so this is effectively a 1-second cooldown, and then you have a 1.2 global cooldown on your secondary. So honestly, you aren't really going to have a build that's like, oh man, I'm suffering by not being able to use my primary. It's like, all right, primary, secondary, you can spam that all the way through, bread and butter. And you can just be like, all right, now let's throw special in the mix to get my flash strength or whatever. Never really a bad option for a lot of classes. Not for a lot of classes. For about half of classes, it's not a bad option. 3-second cooldown does not matter as much as you would think, and it is very good on a good build. The 3-second cooldown just doesn't matter for like Hexblade or Heavyblade. Anywho, Critic Greatsword, 700 damage on a cooldown of 16 seconds. Flashes around you, so it has a chance to miss. Right down here with the rest. The damage is about as good as everything else. Has a chance to miss. It's fine. Big sword does damage. It's a good enough chunk of damage. It can help you get to the DPS check. It's much better than Nightstar Grimoire in a lot of cases because its cooldown is much shorter and it's doing about the same damage. But like, if you actually run the numbers, it's not crazy different from like Sleeping Greatbow, so it's just fine. Granite, no, not Granite. Great Steel Shield. Your defense has a 30% larger radius and vulnerability effects last 1 second longer. Picked up the wrong one right there. Right there. The issue is defensive items aren't going to help you pass the DPS check, but I do admit 1 second more of invulnerability is kind of huge. It has saved me. Out of a lot of the defensive items, this is the one I want to take. Also, defensive 30% larger radius, like, kind of matters for Heavyblade and Wizard. Not that much, but it's something. Stonebreaker Staff. Your special's cooldown is increased by 2 seconds, but deals 40% more damage. I want to put it in S tier, but I still think it goes in A tier. Used to it was S tier because it's so good on every character, and it is good on every character. There's not really a single character who doesn't like it, other than Bruiser, probably. A lot of characters don't care about their special's cooldown at all. Dancer doesn't care. Sniper doesn't care. Wizard cannot care. Like, so the 2 second extra cooldown doesn't usually matter, and 40% is a lot of damage increase. But, and it is enough to get you to the DPS check on a lot of builds. Like, yeah, it's S tier. It's S tier because every class can take it except Bruiser at pretty much every moment and benefit from it crazy well. Even Heavyblade, who's like, oh, I do care about my cooldown on my special. Yeah, but it's 40% damage. Like, 40% damage is way more than a 2 second cooldown really is going to bother you. So, it's not like as high S tier as a Mega Charge special or anything like that, but it's pretty free take on pretty much everyone. Tough Gauntlet. All your abilities and loot deal 30% more damage, but all global cooldowns are increased by 0.2 seconds. This effectively comes out to like a 10% global damage buff. 10% global damage buff isn't bad, but it's not as good as like just applying curse and getting that for free without having to worry about like global cooldowns or anything. I'd say it's about as good as these loot items. There's definitely cases you'll take it because it's like, oh, I want a higher global cooldown, and just in case you're taking like this very specific item right here, Sacred Stone Charm, I think it's called. Or you'll take it when you have like Windbite Dagger, so it's like actually it doesn't matter. Even though they synergize meh together, like it's a damage increase, but it's not a crazy damage increase. Taking it with Metronome Boots is actually pretty solid. Then it's just a 30% increase, but most times it's like less than a 10% damage increase, so it's mid. Rockdragon Mail, your movement speed is significantly reduced, will shield you from damage every 60 seconds, starts battle on a 15-second cooldown. Okay, there's issues with this. There's a lot of issues with this. One, defensive items just don't matter. They do not matter in the slightest. They can matter if your build is already great and you just want a little bit more survivability. That's where I put this in like C tier, because it's like, all right, later on, if my build wants a little more survivability, that's a solid option. This item protects you from damage. It's like a Holy Mantle effect if you've played Binding of Isaac, but your movement speed is significantly reduced. By taking this, you're going to be taking a crazy amount of damage. Like, there's a lot of attacks that become unavoidable because your movement speed is significantly reduced. So most times when you take it, it is a net neutral at best, net negative a lot of times, because 60 seconds is a lot of seconds. One, it starts battle on a 15-second cooldown. Usually that doesn't matter because the start of battles are kind of tame, but it can matter. That's 15 seconds, you're unprotected, and you have movement speed significantly reduced. We'll shield you down. Then the 60-second cooldown is just egregious. Battles last like, 200 seconds at their longest? And, well, this is going to shield you like a max of 3 times per battle, and that's if you get hit immediately every single time. Most times it is like a 1 damage shield for a significant movement speed reduction, which is going to make you take way more damage. Absolutely awful. Probably the worst item in the game. I used to like it. I had a fun run with it once, so I used to like it. It sucks. Obsidian Hairpin increases special damage by 20% whenever you gain invulnerability. Your special has a 50% chance of resetting. So it is most similar to Crowfeather Hairpin, except not every character has a debuff built into them. In fact, only like 2 characters have a debuff built into them. Whereas Obsidian Hairpin, every character can gain invulnerability upon using their defensive. Additionally, Heavyblade can gain invulnerability upon using just the regular special. And a lot of classes can also grab something that gives them invulnerability on other effects. So Obsidian Hairpin is a 20% damage increase, but the main benefit is crazy special resets. Do I think that pushes it into A tier? Yes, I do. I think it does push it into A tier, because if I'm tasked with choosing between Kunai and Obsidian Hairpin, it's going to be a iffy choice. Can it make the damage check all on its own in the right build? Totally. Will it usually? Probably not, honestly, but it's a very good item. Very, very good item. It's a 3% damage increase, plus it's a great reset. Iron Greaves. Every 12 seconds, standing still will grant you brief invulnerability and reset your defensive. Movement speed is slightly reduced. Starts battle on cooldown. So this is Shinobi Tabi. No, we have Shinobi Tabi at home. Instead of increasing your movement speed, it reduces it. Instead of being 8 seconds, it's 12 seconds. Instead of granting you 5 seconds of invincibility, it grants you brief, which is 1 second invulnerability. Instead of resetting your special, it resets your defensive, which honestly can be better. And instead of giving a 30% damage increase, it gives nothing. What a joke, honestly. Like, it is literally just, no, we have Shinobi Tabi at home. God damn, this item fucking is not it. It wants to go in F tier, but resetting your defensive can be useful on like Wizard or something. So it can help you do like some Nova damage on Wizard. Other than that, most of the times it's like just bad. Isn't it like, what's the reduction on it? Let me check on the speed reduction. It's just slightly, right? Yeah, it's slightly reduced. It's still like a net negative. Like, even if it was movement speed is slightly increased, brother, you're still just a worse Shinobi Tabi. So yeah, this is the Shinobi Tabi that's been sitting in the fridge for way too long. Growing a little bit of mold. Volcano Spear, your primary inflicts burn. Burn is busted. Burn reapplies your damage after 5 seconds. So you hit once, you redo that damage after 5 seconds. Great pairing with like Dragonhead Spear. A lot of classes like Bruiser or Heavyblade, not so much Bruiser, but Heavyblade, it's like, okay, I'm only going to be using my primary once every 5 seconds anyways. You just doubled my damage. Now on Bruiser, it's less of a double damage, it's more of a, cool, I get an extra primary hit every 5 seconds. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. A tier, because it can totally carry runs on the right character. Actually, maybe it wants to be B tier, because not many characters actually have that huge of a primary. A lot of characters can, though. Yeah, as long as you aren't running like Dancer or Assassin, it's pretty good. And even if you're running Assassin or Dancer, still extra damage. Still a lot of extra free damage that's comparable to bleed sometimes, not always, though. Whereas if you're running like Wizard, cool, extra 500, well, not 500, extra 200 damage, cool. Running Heavyblade, awesome. Running Bruiser, cool. I'll just do 1,000 damage again after another 5 seconds. Not bad at all. Red Dragon Blade, your secondary inflicts burn. Used to rank this a lot lower. Honestly, it's not so awful. I can see a use case where you've amped up like your secondary. I still personally think it's D tier, but like, you can make it work. Most secondaries aren't doing enough damage for it to be like valuable. The reason primary is so high up there, or Red Dragon Spear, or whatever, what is it called? Volcano Spear. Whoops. The reason that's so high is because your primary has a much higher cap than your secondary. Most secondary builds are going to be like fast Windbite Dagger builds. But I mean, if you're running a 500 damage secondary because you for some reason have like Obsidian Rod or something, not Obsidian Rod, Timespace Dagger, then yeah, fine. This is like a very good option. It's just very niche and most times you won't want it. But hey, it's a damage increase. Like all of these, taking it's not going to hurt you. It's a damage increase, even if a slight one. Although I would definitely take Witch's Cloak over it. I would take most of these over it, actually. Because these are going to increase your damage in a very, not impactful. There's a reason they're in D tier. But Witch's Cloak has a certain like higher ceiling than Red Dragon Blade. And it's much more likely to hit that ceiling. Flame Bow. Every 10 seconds fires a projectile at your targeted enemy that deals 180 damage and applies burn. You can effectively treat it as every 10 seconds do 360 damage split up. If you do the math, it's better than a lot of these, but it's not quite enough to get out of C tier. I used to like it a lot more, and then I did like some of the math, actually played around with it. It's never helping me get to the DPS check that much, but like, it's some aid getting a DPS check. It's not significant, but it is there. 360 damage every 10 seconds is not awful. I'm not gonna lie. Not awful. Meteor Staff, special inflicts burn. Almost wants to be S. It could be S tier, but we're gonna put it right around here. Pretty crazy. Unless you have a multi-hit special, because multi-hit does not really pair well with burn, it's busted. If your special has one big hit, for example, Dancer's 500 damage Emerald special, cool. You now get to apply that again in 5 seconds. Oftentimes, this can double your special's damage in a lot of cases, and even if it's not doubling its damage, it's at least giving it like a 50% increase. Crazy powerful. And the more powerful your special is, the more it scales. It scales with literally everything. Get Stonebreaker Staff? Cool. This does 40% more damage. It's like actually really, really crazy. And this actually will carry you to the damage cap pretty much 100% of the time. Now, the only reason it's not an S tier is because it's not like a must take, but it's goddamn close. I'm not gonna lie. There's a few classes like Ancient doesn't want it as much, Druid doesn't want it as much, Bruiser doesn't want it as much. Everyone else, actually, Hexblade doesn't want it as much either. That's the only reason it's not an S tier is like a lesser half of the cast doesn't want it on certain gemstones. You can easily upgrade into a gemstones on most of those characters, which will want it. And the characters who do want it use this thing to a crazy degree. It is almost S tier. It's very close to S tier. I'm debating it. I'm having to convince myself not to. Phoenix Charm. If you perish in battle, restore 2 full HP instead. Only works once. Doesn't do anything to help you reach the DPS check unless, like, I guess it helps you with 1 DPS check because you can get a little bit of extra damage while you're sitting there dying to the DPS check. It's fine. If you're in a party, just wait for yourself to revive. Not that big of a deal. If you aren't in a party, it can save you in a very weird circumstance where it's like, if you get to Shira, your damage is god tier, you don't need any damage, and then you see Phoenix Charm right before Shira, okay, you've got to pass, take it. And that way, it's like, fine, it can be D tier. Honestly, if you had to tell me which I'd be more excited for between Phoenix and Greaves, it's a close fight. Both are kind of... It just doesn't do anything to help you reach the DPS check, so it gets right there. But it's not like actively making you take damage like the armor. Demon Horns, all your abilities and loot deal 30% more damage. If you use your defensive, this effect ends until the end of battle. It's almost A tier, but it's not quite an A tier. It gets B tier because a lot of classes do rely on their defensive, and eventually you're going to be taxed with take damage or use your defensive. You can either take damage, keep your cool damage buff, or you can use your defensive and lose your cool damage buff. So it's not as reliable as most of the damage buffs up in A tier, and it's not as consistent as most of the damage buffs up in A tier. But 30% global damage is crazy. 30% global damage is better than most of the items here. Depends on the character. Like Wizard, you're not going to want to use this. Dancer, you're probably not going to want to use this, but you can get away with using it on Dancer. Heavyblade, you can totally get away with using it, although you do get rid of a really good option for yourself. So it's limiting, but it's very good. Flamewalker Boots, all global cooldowns are shortened by 15%, and your movement speed increases significantly. If you use your defensive, this effect ends until the end of battle. So this one is a 15% damage increase effectively, because global cooldowns 15% effectively translates to that. But it increases your movement speed by a lot, and it is fun. It is pretty fun. Is it as good as Demon Horns? Not really. Is it in the same tier? Yeah, probably. I've definitely taken it, and obviously if you get them in conjunction, awesome. And it's pretty dang good. Pretty fun. In fact, I should mention, if your global cooldowns are 1.1 seconds, then it is better. I mean, not 1.1 seconds. If your global cooldowns are 1.2 seconds, then it is better than Metronome Boots, because it turns your global cooldowns into 1.02 seconds. So it is better than Metronome Boots on a lot of cooldowns, which is handy. But Metronome Boots doesn't limit your defensive. Fire Scale Corset, all of your cooldowns are reduced by 3 seconds. If you use your defensive, this effect ends. This effect is stable till the end of battle. This one is not as good as the other two. It relies on other things to work. But I'm not going to lie, it probably has a better ceiling than Pajama Cap. About the same as Pajama Cap for similar reasons. But I mean, 1 second extra is 1 second extra. And if you're going hard into that build, you really want this specifically. If you get both, 5 seconds is crazy. Absolutely crazy. Plus, it affects your special too. So it is a damage increase. It's just not that crazy of a damage increase. Could be good on like a Bruiser Red Dragon Blade build. Like if you have Fire Scale Corset, great. Take Red Dragon Blade as Bruiser. Not too bad. Diamond Shield. Every 25 seconds, using your defensive will grant you invulnerability for 5 seconds and erase projectiles in a large radius around you. Starts battle on a 10-second cooldown. So effectively, 25 seconds, you get invulnerability for 5 seconds. The issue is, if you're using your defensive, you're already getting some invulnerability, right? And most of the time, that invulnerability is enough. Not always. Sometimes that invulnerability is not enough, and this is helpful. But you better hope it's 1 out of 5 times you use it. Or I guess not 1 out of 5 times you use it. That's definitely a misnomer. You better hope the time you use your defensive, it is with Diamond Shield. Now, if you're only using your defensive every 30 seconds anyway, yeah, invulnerability 5 seconds is very handy. I just don't care for it much because it doesn't do anything to help you get to the DPS check, and it's not going to save you against the DPS check. So it just doesn't end up doing much, and it's less consistent for me than Gray Steel Shield. Gray Steel Shield, honestly, I only need 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a long time in this game. 5 seconds is an egregious time, and a lot of it's wasted between attacks. Because, like, you'll use it, and then most of it gets wasted between an attack. Because, like, oh shoot, I need to use my defensive because this laser beam's coming at me. You defensive through it, maybe you didn't even need the 5 seconds. 2 seconds is enough time, and you want it to be consistent. And this is just not consistently happening every time you use your defensive. Peridot Rapier increases secondary damage by 20%. Every 8 seconds using your secondary will grant you a brief invulnerability and erase projectiles in a large radius around you. It's grown on me a little bit. It genuinely has grown on me a little bit. Top of D tier. There is a very few circumstances where you want it. But if you have something like Obsidian Hairpin or something that applies on like invulnerability, then it's not bad, honestly. It's not bad. Sometimes I have used it to save my ass. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I've used it to save my ass. Does it save me as much as anything up here? No. Does it do as much damage as anything up here on average? No. Does it help me get to the DPS check? Not really. 20% secondary damage isn't a lot, especially since secondary doesn't usually do much damage. Garnet Staff. Increases special damage by 20%. Your special will erase projectiles in a radius around you and gain a brief invulnerability. Right about as good as the Stuffed Rabbit for a different reason. Stuffed Rabbit is like your actual defensive option. So you take Stuffed Rabbit and you use it as a defensive tool for 3 seconds. Great. Invulnerability for a brief second. It is enough to save you from some attacks, but it's not too reliable because it's not quite long enough. But it can save you. Don't get me wrong. Totally can save you as long as your secondary isn't like, your special isn't slowing you. Its main thing is that it activates the invincibility at all. That means Obsidian Hairpin now has a 50% chance to reset your special on use. That's crazy. Something that does damage when you gain invulnerability now applies every time you're using your special. If you're spamming your special 1/3 of the time at least, then you're invincible 1/3 of the time. It's not actually so bad. But it's not like wonderful. Plus, at worst, it's a 20% increase that has a pretty good ceiling, unlike the ones lower on the list. Sapphire Violin, every 18 seconds, grants elegy to all allies for 8 seconds. So almost 50% uptime, more like 40. Breaks if you take damage twice. Elegy has 30% more damage. This item is going to depend on how confident you feel and what difficulty you're playing on. If I join a normal lobby, I'm taking these items 100% of the time because they're good. If you don't get hit, they're good. On Lunar mode, depends. If I need help on a boss and my DPS is not going to cut it and it is do or die time and this is right before the boss, this is going to get me through the boss. As long as I can not take damage, it's going to get me through the boss. And hell, a lot of times, if I take 2 damage, the fight's fucking almost over anyways. I'm either almost dead or the boss is almost dead. And so it helps you get through the boss. And if you're really skilled, it's free damage. It genuinely is just free a ton of damage. Emerald Chestplate. The counter on this item will decrease instead of taking damage. The counter starts on 3. Effectively, it's just a very long way of saying saves you from 3 hits. Saves you from 3 hits is worse than Phoenix Charm in every single world. Because, well, okay. Phoenix Charm isn't going to help you against like things that break. This will help you against things that break. Minor issue, you usually see it with the things that break, so you can't take them both. Other than that, it does not help you reach the DPS check ever. Now, if you're before the Shira fight and you find it, take it. If you already have the DPS to beat Shira, cool. An extra 3 hits, that's awesome. But Phoenix Charm will restore all of your health, which is at minimum 3 hits. If you're on hard mode, that's 6 hits. If you have some health increasing items, that might be 4 or 5 hits. Not bad. Emerald Chestplate, just not that crazy. It's not awful if your DPS is already handled, but personally, it's not going to do anything for your DPS, which sucks, because DPS checking doesn't help you much there. Amethyst Bracelet, deal 30% more damage, breaks if you take damage 3 times. I like this one a little better than the Violin, because I was doing Lunar clears, but I think it's about the same. Sometimes I'll take it above these, depends how confident I'm feeling. 30% global damage is a lot of damage. Breaks every 3 hits isn't that crazy. A lot of times, even on Lunar, that can last you a boss fight or 2. So that's where I almost want to move it up, but it can stay there. Topaz Charm, gain 8 extra gold at the end of each fight. Breaks if you take damage 3 times. Probably top of C tier. Used to, I ranked this one much higher because my theory was you weren't ever going to keep these, but there actually is once you get good. Like, I have gotten good. You can keep these. And you can keep this. What's the cap, though? Like, effectively, gold isn't useful past Royal Staff and past getting gemstones. When you have all your gemstones, level ups don't matter that much. They honestly don't. And so, like, if I see this before a boss, it's not like, oh shit, I can win the boss by taking this. Amethyst Bracelet, I am guaranteed 30% damage for pretty much the entire boss fight. That's usually enough to bypass the DPS check on a build that would not have normally DPS checked the boss. This thing isn't going to save me before a boss, And picking it up early feels weird because it's not damage. Picking it up late feels weird because you're already established. It's just a very weird item. I'm unlikely to take it even above these. It is close to D tier, but there is times where it is like C tier, so it gets to stay there. Ruby Circlet, your special deals 80% more damage, that is almost double, breaks if you take damage once. The ultimate version of all of these. It's kind of fun if you get it before Shira. It's a kind of fun, more offensive version of these, but it actually has like purpose. Like, this will actually help you if you don't take damage. If you don't take damage, this doesn't help you. If you don't take damage, this helps you. If you take damage, it still helps you for at least an attack or two. Now, if you're going to take damage in the first few attacks, don't take it. But if you're confident, 100% double damage. I love the lightning set. This one's been really fun. Brightstorm Spear has a 30% chance of dealing 100 damage to all enemies when your primary does damage. This means if your primary has a multi-hit effect, this will proc for each time. So if you're a dancer playing like Sapphire and you have 3 hit effects, cool. Instead of a 30% chance, it is a 30% chance 3 times. So it's actually got a very high ceiling. Not quite high enough to get out of B tier though. I put it right here. Most classes, it's going to be about equal to these. On some classes, it does go into A tier, and on some like Rabbit Luck builds or whatever, it goes into A tier. For most of the game, or for most of the characters, it's going to be B tier though. Bolt Staff deals 150 damage to all enemies when you use your special. Cool, pretty much just as good as Kunai. It does a little more damage than Kunai, but if you aren't actively using your special, then it's not crazy. But it's not single target, it's multi-target. Kunai is single target, so that kind of sucks. This is multi-target. Really helps in like the Church Mouse fight. 150 damage is a lot of damage, especially on something like Hexblade, which you're going to be spamming it. Very good. Only class it's not really great on. I've even had really good luck on it with like Heavyblade. Early game, this can totally bring you to a DPS check. Just don't use it on like Bruiser probably. Lightning Bow. Every 12 seconds, fire a projectile at your target enemy. It deals 300 damage. Honestly, not bad compared to like Sleeping Great Bow. And cooldown instantly resets when a % chance it succeeds. Oh, it wants to be high so bad. It can totally carry your DPS, but only on a very specific build. It goes right here. So the thing is, not every class has a % chance. A lot of them do. I'd say not half of them, but a good amount of the classes do have % chances built in. The ones that don't can take things like Brightstorm Spear. Great, now every time Brightstorm Spear procs, you're getting a proc off that. It can totally carry runs, and it can be built around, but it is not necessarily super consistent. Darkstorm Knife is the same as Brightstorm Spear, but it does secondary instead of primary. 30% chance of dealing 100 damage to all enemies when your secondary deals damage. Pretty good. It's about the same rank. I've had a bit more luck with it just because Dancer has a much better interaction with it, but it's really, really funny because 4 hits is much better than 2 hits, especially if you're running Rabbit Luck. It just compounds. But for most classes, it's going to be about the same as this. Free damage. Dark Cloud Necklace. Damage from loot is increased by 50%. Pretty basic. I don't like it very much. I'm going to be honest. I do not care for it. Dark Cloud Bracelet has to have at least 2 items to be good, in my opinion. Because, for example, if you have 2 Crescent Moon Daggers, you're never going to get 2, duh, but this is just an example. Let's say you have 2 Crescent Moon Daggers. That is going to do more damage than 1 Crescent Moon Dagger and 1 Dark Cloud. The issue is all of the items it affects are in C tier. So unless you're having a really mid run, you probably don't have many loot items like that. Loot items that actually do damage. Let's take a look at them. These 2 are probably going to be your best bet right here. They don't affect debuffs. They don't affect % increases. They just affect flat damage. If it says it does 150 damage, great. Now it's doing like 50 more damage. Is it bad? No. Most times I'd rather just have 2 Bolt Staffs than a Bolt Staff plus a Dark Cloud Necklace. Dark Cloud Necklace is actually kind of a mid pick. It is hard to make work because you need 2 of these loot items, and even then, by getting 2, they just barely go into B tier. They aren't crazy. Crown of Storms, when a % chance succeeds, deal 200 damage to all enemies. So effectively, it is the bow, except the bow will proc every 12 seconds, regardless of if you have % chance effects. So it's not bad to take, just ever. Because at worst, it's a C tier item which is kind of what makes it a bit higher up the list. Yeah, I kind of want to put it like right up here now, because it's just not a bad take ever. It's not going to be the best take, but it's better than a lot of the C tier items. This one doesn't have that always going to activate condition, but it deals damage to all enemies. So I honestly prefer it over the bow when I'm running some sort of percent chance actual build, but either of these work. They're both great for what they do. Great for percent chance builds. Easy A tier in the right build, easy S tier even in the right build. You can completely make a run. They're awesome. Thunderclap Gloves. All abilities have a 20% chance of dealing 200 damage to all enemies when used. This one's pretty good. This one, low A tier, honestly. For every class, it's not bad, is the thing. Since it's just all abilities, it works. No matter what your class is, it just works. If you're a bruiser doing primary spam, cool. Your primary has a 20% chance to do 200 more damage. 200 damage is not insignificant. It's a really good gateway drug into like a lot of these percent chance effects. If you have rabbit luck, it goes awesome. If you don't have rabbit luck, I'm not gonna lie, it makes the DPS check on the boss way easier. So you need about 5 hits to make it work if you have like no luck boosting effects. Average global cooldown time, let's consider it 1, even though it's probably going to be like 1.2. Let's just say it's 1. Cool. That's 200 damage every 5-6 seconds. Better than Sleeping Great Bow. So honestly, it helps the DPS check a lot. It has way more synergy than Sleeping Great Bow, and it helps the DPS check a lot. So I put it A tier. Easy for me. Storm Petticoat, do 250 damage to all enemies when you gain invulnerability. Another one of these, it fits in B tier. Really good on Heavyblade because they gain invulnerability so much. Otherwise, it's just when you use your defensive, it's going to give you 250 extra damage. Not bad. It has a little more usability than like Reaper's Coat, because you might be saying, oh wait, Reaper's Coat's 50 more damage. Sure, but like let's say you get this Garnet thing. That's where Garnet like really makes this pop off. Storm Petticoat has a lot of things it can scale off of, gaining invulnerability. Also, when you take damage, that counts as gaining invulnerability, so you can kind of think of it as a Thorns effect. Not that crazy, but it's pretty good, honestly. Across all characters, I'm never sad to see it. It does help on the DPS check, but it's not going to be as strong as, say, like Thunderclap Gloves. All right, the next one is the Shrine set. Actually, I used to love the Shrine set. Now I think Shrine set's kind of mid. Holy Greatsword. Every 10 seconds grants you Smite and then slices the air around you, dealing 200 damage to nearby enemies. The Smite has a 100% uptime. It will always be giving you Smite. 100% Smite uptime puts it in B tier. If you're a solo player, it's not bad. If you're a solo player, move these two down and put them about with this, honestly. These two affect your party, and they do a little more damage. This one affects only you, not your party. That's why it's low. Granted, while I don't think it's as good as like a 10% damage on all allies, it's not bad. 200 damage and a permanent 10% buff for you. It's not bad. I'm willing to put it in C tier, actually. Actually, no, it's about no. It's just not a big enough damage increase that I care that much. No, it goes up. Like, it does really help me clear DPS checks on solo. It's just not that crazy. This is a better solo ranking. If you're playing like with party members, as you gain party members, move it down to C tier. So that's where that one stands. Sacred Bow, every 10 seconds, fires a projectile at your targeted enemy that deals 250 damage. Cooldown instantly resets when you gain a buff. Gaining buffs is actually very easy to do. In fact, I would argue more easy to do than percent chances. They don't usually happen as often as percent chances, and the cap is a bit lower in my opinion. But honestly, if I'm chosen to pick between the two items, depending on the class, I'll go for either one. It's very good on party play because party members can't usually activate your percent chance effects or anything. Sometimes it can, not usually. Party members can give you buffs. Playing with a druid, congrats, you just got a buff. It's called Flutter Step. Playing with a dancer, congrats, you just got maybe 1 or 2 buffs. Playing with like a Hexblade, there's a chance you got a buff. It's a low chance, they would have had to go for a specific gemstone. Playing the bruiser, congrats, you got a buff. It's called Berserk. So very good. Even if you aren't able to give yourself a buff or get a buff from allies, it's still like a C tier item because it's going to happen every 10 seconds, regardless of if you're getting a buff or not. Pretty good. Purification Rod. Every 18 seconds, using your primary will give you Elegy for 5 seconds. Effectively, it is a 30% uptime for a 30% more damage. So 30% of the time you're doing 30% more damage. Used to think it was crazy. Now I'll take it like probably more than these. It's useful because you can choose when the buff is, and a lot of people forget that. If you can't choose when the buff is, then no, it would be worse than all of these. But if you have a super big special hit coming out, cool, 30% more special damage. Is 30% special damage crazy? Not really. But you can choose when it is, and it's not bad as far as that goes. Ornamental Bell, every 15 seconds, grants smite to all allies for 10 seconds. Swap these two's location if you have more players. It is still not as good as anything on this tier, though. Really, it just isn't. The issue is, everything that gives curse and has mostly permanent uptime is doing the same thing as this, except this only has a 60% uptime. 60% uptime is not that crazy, and 10% damage for 60% uptime, it's like a 7% damage increase, whereas these are just a flat 10% damage increase to everyone. So, kind of depends. It's not great, though. Honestly, I'd put it below most of these, especially on solo. It's just not helping you clear DPS checks. No one cares about 7% extra damage. It's honestly close to being below Peridot Rapier, but it can stay for now. Shard Maiden's Kasoto, when you have a buff, your movement speed increases significantly, and you deal 25% more damage. 25% more damage when you have a buff is nice, because on a lot of classes, it's very easy to get 100% uptime on that. And then it is just going to be a 25% more damage global buff. I put it next to Demon Horns. It will definitely help you in the early game get to DPS checks, but it's not going to be crazy. Compared to like Purification Rod, you can just activate this 5 seconds anytime you use your defensive or anything from most classes. Druid, congrats. You get Flutter Step, now you have 25% more damage. Dancer, same thing. And with a good party, you're going to be getting buffs most of the time, so this is mostly just free damage. But sometimes it isn't, depending on the party. And also, the movement speed gain can be kind of clunky. You should be prepared for it, but when your ally like randomly throws like Warcry on you, it's going to give you a movement speed buff. Can be kind of weird. Wizard really likes this because you can just sit in your field and then get even more damage. So that's awesome. But it can definitely carry, but I don't think it's as good as anything in nature. Red-White Ribbon, deal 5% more damage, buffs you place last 50% longer. Used to love this. Now I think it's kind of bad. Like, it's definitely better than Red-Black Ribbon. The issue is, 1, if you don't have buffs, it's useless. 5% damage, no one cares. 2, if your buffs are on hit, like Black Strike, Flash Strength, Charge is just ineffective. Charge is not considered a buff, by the way. So, don't think of it like that. Now, it is useful getting like an extra 3 seconds on your Warcry. How useful is that? Not that useful. Like, it's handy, but it's not going to be better damage than anything in this tier. Now, if you're giving yourself super for 8 seconds, hell yeah. Take that, because that's an extra time you're being invulnerable. That's where it's handy. But in a lot of cases, it requires another item to be good. Otherwise, it just falls, like, really short. In fact, like, I'd take Witch's Cloak about as much. I'd take it a little less than Red-White Ribbon, so I'm going to keep it in C tier. Because Red-White Ribbon, I know I can give myself a buff, and therefore it's going to have some utility. This one, I'm not sure if I will ever eventually be doing debuffs, so that's where that doesn't get it. Divine Mirror, every 10 times you use an ability, deal 500 damage to all enemies. Pretty much the same. It's kind of worse than a lot of these, but yeah, it's worse than a lot of these just because if you run the numbers, it's not that crazy. Every 10 seconds effectively is what you can treat it as. 500 damage. It's not bad. Actually, it's about mid with all of these. Actually, quickly doing the math. It's fine. Golden Chime, every 2 times you use your defensive, gain Elegy for 8 seconds. Elegy deal 30% more damage. So effectively every 30 seconds, gain Elegy for 8 seconds. No. Kind of sucks. Sure, sometimes some defensives make that a bit easier, but not that many. So yeah, it goes bottom of C tier. It's going to help you pass the DPS check less consistently than any of these loot items. But it's not awful, I suppose. The Lucky Set, Book of Cheats just gives you a random buff and or does random damage to an enemy every time you use your special. It'll always do something. Maybe it'll activate Golden Katana, which is a 500 damage for free. Maybe it'll give you super for 5 seconds. Maybe it'll give you Vanish for 5 seconds. Always give you 5 seconds buff. Maybe it'll give the enemy like poison for 5 seconds. All of the buffs and debuffs in this are actually pretty strong, and it is really strong on a special spam build. If you were to ask me which I prefer more, Kunai or Book of Cheats, they would be about tied, because the buffs can be crazy. Blackstrike is way better than a Kunai. Then if it gives you like an extra 500 damage, all right, that's better than a Kunai. Generally, I feel like the effects are better than a Kunai. Even haste is probably better than a Kunai, but it doesn't have the reliability of the Kunai. And it's also going to need special spam. It's not going to be like good on like Ancient. Special spam. It's not bad on Ancient, but it's not great. Golden Katana. Your primary and secondary have a 5% chance to deal 100 damage 5 times in a large radius. So 500 damage on a 5% chance. Honestly, it's a lot less consistent than anything up here, I think. Yeah, I can stay in B tier. Without Rabbit Luck, it's honestly kind of trash. Without Rabbit Luck, it is doing about as much as these two. Probably less, actually. Way less. It doesn't help you at all without Rabbit Luck. In fact, without Rabbit Luck, it's here. If you get Rabbit Luck, it's doing crazy damage, though. 500 damage every time you use a primary or a secondary is very much a lot. It's just, it's going to go in low C tier. I'm in low B tier. If you tell me to take this, like as my first item choice, I have this lined up against a bunch of these guys, it's a 50-50 on what I take. But these guys don't have as high of a ceiling as this does. That's about it. It doesn't even work for that well with like the bow or Crown of Storms because it's such a low activation chance unless you have Rabbit Luck. If you get Rabbit Luck, then great. This is awesome. Not gonna lie, top of C tier. If you get Rabbit Luck, it's great. It's awesome. If you don't have Rabbit Luck, it is almost useless. Not almost useless. It just doesn't do as much damage as these do. This next one is a way to get Rabbit Luck. This one's going to, every 20 seconds, grant Rabbit Luck to all allies for 5 seconds. I rank it just about as good as all of the curse stuff. Rabbit Luck is going to increase your crit chance significantly, which is a nice extra damage boost. And it's going to activate a lot of these strong percent chance effects. It's going to help your Dancer. It's going to help a lot of your classes, but it's only every 1/4 of the time. Royal Staff. Your special deals extra damage based on how much gold you have, 1% for every 1 gold. It depends on when you get it is the issue. If you get it early on, I would argue it's B tier. It's like solid high B tier. If you get it later on, it's probably like one of the higher A tiers. I'm going to put it in low A tier, and here's why. If you get it early on, it's iffy. If you get it early on, you can probably rack up about 50 coins, and that's 50% special damage. 50% special damage is better than a lot of things on this list, like right here. Hell, it's better than Stonebreaker Staff. That is a no consequence 50% damage. But it means you can't buy a gemstone. And a gemstone oftentimes is 50% damage. Emerald Special on Dancer is almost double Dancer's regular damage. Actually, I don't think it's almost double. It's a lot of damage, though. It's a lot of damage increase. If you get it late game, you can easily get like 100% damage on this, and it's better than even like Ruby Circlet, which is crazy. But before the first 2 areas, you just don't have the money to fiddle with. You more so want the money on your strong gemstones or whatever. Although, honestly, I don't buy level ups usually until I can confirm that I most likely will not be seeing Royal Staff. That's just me. I think Royal Staff is crazy good, and I really like it because whenever I have like 80 gold near the end game and find it, that's huge. It just struggles a bit in consistency, but even if you pick it early game, it can allow you to skip the shop and not waste money on like level ups or anything and still help you meet the DPS check. It just doesn't help us getting as much as getting like anything else on the list early game, at least. Ballroom Gown makes you slightly luckier and slightly increases your movement speed. So like a slight crit chance upgrade and a slight movement speed upgrade, probably top of C tier. Without being able to really tell how much that percent chance is, it's hard to tell. On something like a Dancer, I'm always going to take Ballroom Gown over most of these loot items because I feel like it's a strong increase. But like if I'm playing Heavyblade, nah, give me any of these. Put this thing in D tier. Kind of depends on the class, kind of depends on the build. Probably C tier. It's not like anything too crazy. Silver Coin on pickup, gain 30 gold. The best case for this is early game, you pick it up and you can buy another gemstone early game. Late game, it's absolutely useless because you have usually more money than you have gemstones and everything, and converting this into level ups turns this into a 6% damage increase, which is kind of not very useful. Probably would put it above, just above Topaz. It can be good if you have like Royal Staff, and that's about it. That is really just about it. Queen's Crown. Critical hits now do 175% extra damage instead of the normal 75% extra damage. This is crazy. Critical hit chance is 30% in this game. Since critical hit chance is 30% in this game, this means all of your damage has a 30% chance to do over 2 times damage, effectively be a black strike hit, which is really, really good. There's no downside to taking it. On average, it's like, I think it comes out to like a 40% damage increase globally. Global 40% damage increase, no downside. Take this every time you see it. The elites don't want you to know this. The government doesn't want you to know this. It is a 40% flat damage upgrade. I might like disappear tomorrow for saying this. They don't want you to know this, but it's just like a flat, huge damage upgrade. It's not bad on any character. Take it, man. It's also amplified if you have like better luck things. More luck equals more critical hit chance. But at base, critical hit chance is like 30%, so it's good. Sorry, my nose, I got cat hair on it because Daisy jumped up on my lap, and so cat hair is everywhere. It's so itchy, and it sucks. I don't even have a cat allergy. Mimic Rabbit Foot makes you significantly luckier, not a real rabbit's foot. It's a lot better than the half ballroom gown. I'm going to put it about next to Trumpet. Depends on my build. Heavily depends on my build. If I have percent chance effects, I'll take it every single time because it's like, oh, free critical hit chance. At worst, it is just free critical hit chance. Would I rather have any of these than just free critical hit chance? Yeah. But at worst, it's free critical hit chance. I'd rather have it than any of these. Even in my starting chest, I would rather have it than any of the C tier options. Mostly because free crit chance, and it has a good chance to scale into something in the future. But it's not going to help that much on the immediate DPS check you'll be facing. The life set. Get ready to fill out our low tiers. So unfortunately, most of these just heal you or give you defensive options, and that doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is because you're probably going to get DPS checked, and picking these up is a surefire way to get DPS checked. Butterfly Ocarina, yeah, pretty much F tier. It's better than Granite, what's it called? Because it doesn't hurt you actively. But all it does is on pickup, heal all allies for 1, heals all allies for 1 HP every 2 fights. On pickup, it heals all allies by 1. You just opened a chest, which healed you by 2. Or 1 if you're on Lunar. Sure, some people might not have been fully topped off, but most people are. Most people are fully topped off after opening the chest. If they aren't fully topped off after opening the chest, damn. It doesn't do anything to help your DPS, and then every 2 fights, it'll heal you by 1. Cool. What if no one needs healing? What if you find this in the fight before Shira? It just doesn't matter. It doesn't impact the game very much at all. It's handy for like noob players. If you're playing on like normal and there's no DPS checks, sure, pick it up on someone and you might get a free heal. 1 health at the end of every 2 fights still isn't crazy though. Even if I'm on normal and I'm like putting on my newbie lens over here and I'm like, well, I'm not great at the game. 1 extra healing at every 2 things just isn't good. Mathematically, there's a good chance no one will need it. Fairy Spear, literally the only good thing in this set. I'm kind of kidding, but not really. Your primary has a 30% larger radius and deals 30% more damage, but stops movement when used. B tier, up here with this. Any effects, like any of the Emerald defensives that say, this no longer affects movement speed stuff, then cool. That means you'll no longer stop moving on primary. That means it's a straight, flat 30% increase to damage, almost on the level of Dragonhead Spear. Stop moving is much more severe than 3-second cooldown for most classes. So most classes are going to suffer a little bit by taking it, but a lot of classes, if you can get past that 30%, well, not 30%, if you can get past the stop moving, you're going to be fine. It's a good damage increase. 30% is great. Extra radius is awesome, especially on heavyblade and stuff. So pretty good. I like it. Moss Shield, every 12 seconds using your defensive will reset its cooldown instantly. About as good as these. It's really good on offensive defensives, or if you just need a quick double defensive to get out of a sticky situation. Defensive items inherently suffer because of DPS checks, but this defensive item has a chance to be offensive if you're like playing Wizard or something, because you get an extra Nova Field every single time you're doing anything, which is handy. I wouldn't take it above most of these though, because it's not going to help on the DPS check that much. Floral Bow, every 6 seconds, fires a projectile at your target enemy that only deals 250 damage, only activates when standing still. Kind of just worse than most of the bow relics. You have to stand still to use it, which means you're not going to be getting 100% uptime on it really ever, because it's not something you build your build around. It's more just like, oh, I stood still. Oh yeah, I have Floral Greatbow. And it's not worth remembering because it's not that great. It's just not crazy. Blue Rose, your max HP is increased by 1, has a 50% chance of healing you for 1 at the end of each fight. It doesn't do anything at all to increase your DPS, so it gets a low rating, but it does increase your health by 1, and increasing your health by 1 is handy. The healing is alright. The healing can come in handy, but for the most part, it's like, if I have like a really goated build and I just don't want to like fumble or something, then I'll take it because the extra health does help. And like, if my build is already like awesome, put it up in like B tier. I don't think I'd take it anything above B tier. I mean, if my build is awesome, I'll probably put it like right in between here. I wouldn't take it, I would take it above this, but I wouldn't take it above that. But most times your build is not already goated, and if your build is already goated, take whatever's fun. Take whatever. Don't listen to this guide if your build's already goated. If you're trying to make a good build, don't take this. It just won't help you on DPS checks. Sunflower Crown, max HP is increased by 1. You become able to slightly graze into projectile and slightly increase your movement speed. A little bit better than that. The side effect is just better. Grazing into projectiles, it does let you get really deep into the projectiles, and it also does increase your movement speed. Nice. Extra HP. Meh. Let's see. Grasswoven Bracelet. Your max HP is increased by 1. All abilities and loot hitboxes are 30% larger. Slightly increases movement speed. Slightly increased movement speed, and the extra range can help you do some AoE damage. Still, it's not going to help your damage that much. It's not going to help you pass a DPS check. So therefore, early game and most of the game, it is D tier. Midsummer Dress, your max HP is increased by 1. Ability or loot effects that temporarily slow your movement no longer affect you. Slightly increases movement speed. This is exactly what I would love a health item to look like on average. This shit is honestly very good. Like, I'm not gonna lie. This shit is the craziest healing item. Well, not healing item, but health up item. This is what they should all be modeled after. The reason it's so good is its side effect. 1, max HP isn't irrelevant. It is handy. And when I'm playing on Lunar mode, that's a lot. Like, 1 more max HP is big. And when you get to a DPS check, I should mention, that's 1 more hit you're going to be able to tank. Should I want to rely on that? No. But it is 1 more hit I can tank. The main kicker is ability or loot effects that temporarily slow your movement no longer affect you. It's pretty dang good, honestly. The reason it's good is like Fairy Spear doesn't affect you. A lot of abilities you'll find, you can't use them while moving, especially on Lunar and Hard when things are like really tight. It's the difference between getting a lot of DPS because now you can move and use your attacks, or being stuck using only your secondary because it's the only thing that doesn't slow you down during like a tight attack. So it's just really nice because it opens up a lot more DPS to be done by freeing up your kit from things that slow you down and therefore can't be used during tight attacks. So it is just really nice. Let's see. The poison set. Stake Fang Dagger. Your secondary applies poison for 5 seconds. Poison deals damage once per second. 30 damage. It's fine. Gonna put it up here with the rest of them. I don't feel like it's as good as the bleed debuff, and I don't feel like it's as good as the curse debuff. 30 damage doesn't usually matter. Only matters if you get things that buff it. Even Witch's Cloak wouldn't really make me want to take poison that much. I probably would, but it wouldn't be that crazy. Ivy Staff is the same thing, but your primary applies poison for 5 seconds. Still 30 damage. Right about there. They just aren't that big. They do help your DPS. They help your DPS about as much as all these loot items. So if you take them, you aren't doing anything bad. They are going to help your DPS just as much as these, so they aren't bad. They definitely do help on DPS checks. Special applies poison for 5 seconds, except this poison is 40 damage. That's actually kind of a significant thing, because 40 damage is a lot more than 30 damage when it's being applied once per second, like that. So it goes above these, but probably not anywhere like crazy above these. But you should note, Death's Capped Tome I consider way better than these few. Spider Bite Bow, every 10 seconds, fires a projectile at your targeted enemy that deals 50 damage and applies poison for 5 seconds. The poison does 40 damage. So effectively, it does 50 damage every 10 seconds, and then it does another 40 damage every 10 seconds for 1 second. The math behind this, effectively, it does 250 damage every 10 seconds, and it can't really be increased by anything. The poison doesn't have 100% uptime, And if you really math it out, it really just is 250 damage, just spread out in a very big area. It's just about as good as every other bow. It's a little better than Sleeping Great Bow, if you ask me. Actually, no, because it does less damage than Sleeping Great Bow. In the sense that, like, time per damage, you get me. Compound Gloves. When you deal damage, has a 10% chance to apply decay. Honestly, I use Compound Gloves more so to get the 10% chance effect, because I'm like, oh, 10% chance, maybe I'll get something that has something to do with percent chance. It doesn't stack or anything, so the best you're going to get is 30 damage. It does last a while. It does 30 damage for 30 seconds. Once per second, does 30 damage. Helps your DPS about as much as all these, mostly because it does exactly the same thing, honestly. Decay is not any different than Poison, I should mention. They are literally the exact same thing. And Snakefang Dagger and Ivy Staff both do the same damage, same rate. They just have shorter debuffs, but they're easier to apply. Compound Gloves, it's a bit more random, so I actually kind of like it a bit less. But it doesn't force me into constantly having to use my primary and secondary, so it's like, alright. Poison Frog Charm. When a percent chance exceeds, apply poison to all enemies for 5 seconds. This poison does 50 damage. 50 damage is actually like pretty significant, to where I'll take it like probably right there. Just above a lot of these by a good margin, I would say. Like 50 damage can definitely help you pass DPS check. Venom Hood. Your abilities do 15 more damage. Debuffs you place deal 50 more damage. So it reminds you of this, because all abilities do 15 more damage. That's not bad on its own, right? But debuffs actually benefit more than loot does. Loot does not really care. Poison, think. You're doing 50 damage every second with Poison Frog, the best one. Now you're doing 100 damage every second. It more than doubles most debuffs. Does not work well with Burn, which are the good debuffs, unfortunately. You'll notice Burn is the good debuff. Doesn't work as well with that, but it does work right around... I'd take it above that even if it's an early game. Right around here. It's much better than Witch's Cloak in my opinion, because Witch's Cloak, percent chance, like, percents when it comes to 30, you're getting like 50 damage. That's not crazy. Flat 50 matters a whole lot more. Sure, Witch's Cloak pairs better with the few burn items. The issue is there's just a lot more items that don't do burn. So that's my take on it. Also, it's not a bad cop-out option because 15 extra damage is 15 extra damage. That also helps it significantly. 15 extra damage is actually kind of big. Chemist Coat, your defensive applies poison to nearby enemies for 8 seconds. Slightly increases movement speed, so you gotta be near the enemies. The poison does 40 damage. I actually like it a little worse than these, but it's fine. I don't like having to use my defensive and an offensive option when it's not that worth it, and this is not that worth it. I'd rather have Storm Petticoat, for sure. Just my opinion, though. Seashell Shield. Your defensive has a random cooldown between 1 second and 15 seconds every time you use it. Pretty good. If you consider that the average class has a 15-second defensive, it's always a buff. It's just not a super reliable buff. Now, I will put it right about there in B tier, because it can be very, very helpful. There's a lot of times you're going to be rolling like 1 second defensives, and that's awesome. Necronomicon, every 8 seconds, using your special will reset its cooldown and instantly charge it. Crazy on characters like Ancient, not awful on even like Hexblade. It's still a pretty good damage up. Charge is going to give you that 1.5 times boost, which is why it's good on pretty much every class. Plus, it resets your special. I mean, even if you're Bruiser, reset on your special is kind of huge as long as you aren't like accidentally spamming it. And so, honestly, it can go low A tier. The reset special is the more important part, and a lot of classes really appreciate the reset special. No class doesn't appreciate the charge, though, so it is just a very handy item. Teto Greatsword. Every 12 seconds, slices in a large radius around you, dealing 200 damage, but it slowly gets larger and deals more damage as the fight drags on. So I at first didn't know how to rank this. Now I have played with it a bit more, because I've been really desperate for DPS to get past the DPS checks. I mean, I'm like, all right, fine, I'll take it. Honestly, it's a pretty significant damage increase. By the time it's getting to the second phases of bosses, it's typically already doing like 1,000, 1,200 damage. Not bad. It genuinely can clear DPS checks for you, in a way. It depends how fast you're clearing fights. If your party is not having issues with DPS and you're clearing fights really quick, don't take this. If you're solo struggling on DPS, or if you're with a party and the party is kind of struggling with DPS, matters a little less on party. About right here. I feel like it'll do just as much as the Brooch to help with DPS checks on bosses. And the reason Brooch is up there is because it like really helps on DPS checks with the bosses. Like, for a loot item, it's one of the best loot items in the game, in my opinion. The damage scaling is very good. And it also does get like very significantly bigger. And I know it says slowly gets larger. I find it's actually a very, very strong item. That's just me. Occult Dagger. Your secondary is 80% more powerful. 5 seconds of cooldown is added to your secondary. I before ranked this like super high. I'll rank it low B tier. It's very powerful when you want to use it. Not crazy powerful other times. It's weird because it's either D tier or it's S tier. Well, not S tier. It's either D tier or it's like A tier. It depends on who you're running and what purpose your secondary has in your build. I'm trying to think what classes want it too much. A lot of classes can't actually run it, I'm realizing, upon further inspection. Yeah, I'm going to move it down. Upon further inspection, a lot of classes can't actually run it that well. For example, most classes want their secondary to charge something. They don't need it to damage. In fact, Heavyblade has like a 60 damage secondary. 80% might make that 120 damage, but now you have a 5-second cooldown, so you can't charge your abilities when you need it, and the damage you're losing by doing that isn't that worth it. Bruiser doesn't want it for obvious reasons. You're spamming secondary when you're outside of rage. Now, if you've got permanent rage, maybe. Most times, 5 seconds is just too much of a cooldown and you can't handle it, even if it's double damage. Mermaid Scale Mail. All cooldowns are reduced by 2 seconds. All abilities with cooldown start a battle on an 8-second cooldown. Not bad. It can be about as good as the Fire Scale Corset. A little better even. Put it right there. Very good on certain builds, but not like crazy on any build. But it's not awful on any build either. Now, it's not good if you have like Lancer Gauntlets because you don't want all of your attacks going on cooldown for 8 seconds. That's not fun. But it's like not bad. All cooldowns, even loot cooldowns, it's pretty good. You can use it to great effect with certain items. It's just not that often. Hydrous Blob. Every 8 seconds, using your secondary will fire an Eldritch Beast towards your target, dealing 300 damage. Starts battle on cooldown. It's fine. It's cute. I finally figured out why everyone takes it. It's cute. I like him a bit better than a lot of these loot items. Abyss Artifact. Every 30 seconds, using your defensive will grant you super for 8 seconds. Starts on a 15-second cooldown. Almost 10%, almost 30% of the time, you will be invincible, and you'll have like a 50% damage buff. Because super gives like a 30% damage buff, and it gives you like haste effectively. It's for another 20% global cooldown, which is a damage buff. So it's good. I like it about as much as Midsummer's Dress, I would say. It's really good with certain items, like buff increasing items, and it's very good for defending through things, but not only defending through things. Like, it is a better version of this right here. This is 5-second invincibility. This is 8-second invincibility. Like, honestly, why the hell would you take this? It is way better because it gives you a big damage buff, but that damage buff is not necessarily like, since it's not active a ton of the time, and it takes so long to activate, it's not that impactful. It's more impactful on the defensive side, but it does have some very good damage. Don't get me wrong. Lost Pendant. At the start of each fight, inflict all enemies with Decay for 60 seconds. The Decay does 20 damage. Decay is, again, just poison. Deals damage once per second. It's honestly not good. So all of these deal 30 damage every second, which is huge. This one deals 20. Like 20? And it's not even for the entire fight. These are for the entire fight, presumably. This one's like 60 seconds of the fight. Isn't that much. It's not really going to help you pass that much of a DPS check, nor is it going to help you do much of anything, actually. Darkbite said, Sawtooth Cleaver. Your primary's damage increases by 30%, but its radius by 20%. Literally just better than Fairy Spear. Radius matters less than Stop Moving does. Stop Moving matters way more. Raven's Dagger. Your secondary's damage increases by 50%, but decreases radius by 40%. Good cop-out. I don't think it's as good as some of these, but on the right class, secondary doesn't do awful damage, and radius, again, doesn't matter. It's more so, how much do I care about 50% secondary damage, because secondary 50% usually isn't that much. Like on Heavyblade, that's actually like 30 damage. 30 extra damage is not that crazy, which is, again, why the cap is so much lower than, say, 15 damage on every ability is oftentimes just better than this. But on the cases like Dancer or something, where you actually do have a decent secondary option, it's not bad. It's not as good as, like, whatever the fuck it's called, Shadow Bracelet. I don't know. But it's not bad. It has a cap. It has a ceiling. Maybe move it down a little more. Killing Note increases special damage by 30%, but decreases its radius by 20%. 30% is a lot of percent. Now, decreased radius kind of sucks, but it actually doesn't matter on most characters. Does it get to go in A tier? It's not going to help you clear the DPS check necessarily. It's not going to force a DPS check clear, and that's kind of A tier. It's going to help you clear the DPS check, though. Significantly better than Crow Feathers, in my opinion, just because you don't have to, like, debuff to make it work. Yeah, oftentimes it's going to be B tier. I'm not sad to see it, and it's like, oh, shoot, that's a pretty good damage upgrade. But it's not like, oh, shoot, that's a crazy damage upgrade, like something like these two are. It's just fine. It'll help me on my next DPS check, and I'm definitely not sad to see it. Blacksteel Buckler, your defensive's range decreases by 30%. That doesn't matter for, like, most classes. But now has 2 seconds shorter cooldown. Awesome. And grants counter. Counter is a 50% more damage on the next attack. So effectively, when you use your defensive, you will do 50% more damage on the next attack. And your defensive has a 2 second shorter cooldown. It's pretty awesome. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wants to put this in A tier. Just because, like, 50% damage is 50% damage. It's a lot of damage. But I will refrain and I will put it just below Shrine's Maiden Custodo, because I do still really, really like it. Night Guard Gloves, whichever ability has the highest base damage value, deals 20% more damage. That's a good cop-out option because it's good for everybody. It's not bad for anybody. It's 20% more damage on the ability of it's just already being your damage source. So the reason I put it right there is because it's just like, it's good for everybody, not awesome for anybody. 20% is not actually that much. And in most cases, you would want another more specific thing. Like, no, I'd rather have Fairy Spear than it. If I'm running a primary build, then I'd rather have this than, like, Crow Feather. So it works on any build. That's the reason it's so high. Sniper's Eyeglasses deal 30% more damage when you are separated from the target by at least 3 rabbit leaps. Global increase to damage, crazy. But 3 rabbit leaps is a lot. And a lot of boss attacks forces you in a position you can't do that. In fact, I'd say over 60% of attacks force you in a position you literally can't do that. If there's 2 enemies on the screen, forget it. Literally forget it. So most of the times it is inactive, which for me, probably not that low. Probably right there. When it does happen, great. 30% damage, and it's not so much of a, oh, I play sniper, so I can be super far away from the boss. Not really. I mean, like, let's take the Church Mouse boss. Maddie forces you literally in that circle right at the beginning of the fight. So all of that attack can't work. Is there an enemy near you? Doesn't work. Emerald Lakeside, those 2 girls, the stop moving, keep moving girls, doesn't work. The one who chains you to her, doesn't work. Too many fights and too many situations where it doesn't work. Oftentimes I am actually taking it less than a lot of these. But when it does shine, it shines way brighter than, like, anything on C tier. It just doesn't shine often. Dark Mage Charm, when you've been standing still for 1 second, your special deals 40% more damage. 40% more damage is a lot of damage. Standing still for 1 second is dangerous. On burst damage builds, though, it's actually kind of not bad, though. 40% is a lot of damage. So on burst damage builds, if you're not bad at stop moving, you can effectively treat it like a Fairy Spear, other than it doesn't force it, so it makes it a bit worse, because Fairy Spear forces it, so it feels a little more fluid, whereas you kind of have to gauge, and it's like playing a guessing game. It's like, shit, a moon's coming after me, but I really want to get the special hit off. Can I wait? Can I wait? Can I wait? And it's caused me to take damage, but it's good. It does a lot. First Strike Bracelet, every 15 seconds gain Black Strike when you use your secondary. Black Strike makes you do 200% more damage on your next attack. Literally pretty much the same thing as Omega Charge. Omega Charge is 3 times more damage, and 200% is effectively 3 times more damage, depending on how you look on it. 100% is 2 times, 200% 3 times. These two do effectively the same things, except this one's a buff and synergizes with buffs. This one is a charge thing, so it augments the base attack, which has a bit different, I think, math on how it calculates. This one clears when you use anything, so if you're running something weird where your special isn't charged up and you need to be have your special ready, that sucks. This one only clears when you use your special, so this one is better on primary builds. This one is better on special builds, unless your special is always ready for first strike. Sometimes I've been playing Dancer where it's like, oh, I need to reset my special, but then I get Black Strike and it's just like, ah. This next one used to be a favorite of mine, but it's actually gone down a lot recently. Obsidian Rod, your special strength becomes the total cooldown time of all your abilities and loot. in seconds multiplied by 10 divided by the times it hits your target. Effectively, what this means is your special's damage equals the cooldown time of everything times 10. So if you get 6 seconds of cooldown on your primary or something, cool, 60 more damage on your special. There's a big issue with it. It doesn't do anything immediately. And since it doesn't do anything immediately, for most classes, I will say some classes I think do get the buff immediately and they get a small buff. But since it doesn't do anything immediately, to me, it goes roughly a B tier right there, I want to say. I know Obsidian Rod is like a lot of people's favorite. Actually, it goes right there. I know it's a lot of people's favorites. It's more so I get why everyone likes it. And it does do crazy things, and it does very crazy things after the first area. The issue is it can take a lot of time for it to actually pick up. I've had a lot of times where I pick it up in the first area, I'm like, whoa, we got Obsidian Rod! And like, my special is doing 100 less damage than it would be if I didn't take it, and I'm missing out on an item slot because I took it. And it's like, alright, gemstones didn't vibe with it. Or I'm a character where gemstones just don't really matter for it. Cool, let's keep going. Oh boy. Now I got my second chest, and it has no cooldown items. Or, at best, it has a 10-second cooldown item, and now I am doing equal to what my special would have been doing if I didn't take it. So it takes a lot of time to build up, although if you're Dancer and you get Emerald with it, it will immediately do 8,000 damage, and that's busted. I've got to rank it across all classes. And all classes, universally, it is just worse than all of these. And it is worse than most of these for you. It is very fun, though, so do take it if you have the chance. Darkglass Spear is just worse Obsidian Rod, in my opinion. Your primary strength becomes your special's cooldown multiplied by 30, minus your secondary strength. I should mention, actually, before I get off of Obsidian Rod, Obsidian Rod has a maximum damage of 1,000. It is not infinite. So, 1,000 is the max. 1,000 is a big max. It also should be mentioned, it is divided by the number of times it hits your target. And that does not mean you can get over 1,000 if you have like, oh, I'll have 3 1,000 times hits. Doesn't work like that. It will cap it at 1,000, and then it will divide it by the number of times it hits your target. So if you would be doing 1,000 hits, you're actually doing 333 hits for a total of 1,000. Darkglass Spear. Your primary strength becomes your special's cooldown multiplied by 30 minus your secondary strength. Secondary strength part is usually what kills this. So Darkglass Spear is only good on like 2 classes at base, and it's really hard to increase your special's cooldown in a meaningful way. Like, the only way is like Nova Crown, and that's about it. Other than that, your special's cooldown is probably just going to be 10 seconds or so, and so that's 300 damage. 300 damage primary sounds crazy. Minus it by your, on average, 100 damage secondary. Alright, now we're at 200 damage. Wait, Wizard already does 200 damage on their primary. Wait, Heavyblade already does over 200 damage on their primary. And across all the classes, except Dancer, and like maybe a few others that I'm not as familiar with and haven't done the math on yet, most classes, above half the roster at least, actually just don't benefit from Darkglass Spear immediately, and it's really hard to scale your specials cooldown up. So a lot of times, down here. Situationally, though, really good. For example, if you have like Emerald Special on Dancer, then yeah, it breaks this, but you're not always playing Dancer. If you're always playing Dancer, then fine, move this up to B tier, whatever. It just doesn't work as well as Obsidian Rod. It has a much lesser what it can do. And also, it only does a maximum of 500 damage total, which is kind of sucky because, like on Bruiser, you're going to be doing more than 500 damage at base with your primary with like 1 ruby upgrade. And like, same thing with Heavyblade. How much are you really benefiting, even on the perfect ideal scenario where you have Nova Crown? Just take Ruby. If you took Ruby, then you would have had 400 damage, and 500 isn't that much more than 400. I mean, it's good, but eh. Timespace Dagger. Your secondary strength becomes your special and defensive cooldown added together, multiplied by 10, divided by the number of times your secondary hits your target. This one doesn't have any subtraction effects, so it actually is kind of great. And it's really good. I should mention, Darkglass, Timespace, or Obsidian Rod are really good for overriding something like Ghost Flame. If you've already got Ghost Flame and you're doing 10 damage, might as well turn it back into like 60 damage. Not bad. Timespace Dagger is much better than Darkglass, and I've actually had more luck with it than Obsidian Rod on Dancer at least. But for most other classes, it's not like wild, but it is a damage increase. I honestly do put it a little below Obsidian Rod, mostly because the math just pans out better on more of the roster. Special and defensive's cooldown added together is typically around 25 average. Sometimes it's a little higher, like on a wizard, you're going to have a little bit higher, but most times it's 25. Multiplied by 10, that's 250. Honestly, 250 damage secondary is good. It's really good. Most classes don't do that much damage on secondary. Heavyblade, awesome. You do 60 damage on your secondary. The 250 damage is a good buff, and it can carry you pretty hard. So it's tempting to put it up to A tier. Yeah, I'm tempted to do it, honestly. I genuinely think it's better than Obsidian Rod. Just because, like, at base, it does so much more for most of the roster. It doesn't have as high of a ceiling, although it almost does have as high of a ceiling. I've had more crazy Dancer runs with Emerald Special into this than I have with Emerald Special into Obsidian Rod. So yeah, I put it in A tier. I originally slept on it, effectively treated it as it turns your secondary into 250 damage, and most classes do not do 250 damage with their secondary. So, huge damage increase. Also, if you get it with like Windbite Dagger, congrats, you've won. Quartz Shield. Your defensive cooldown becomes 30 seconds when a loot item activates, when a loot item activates with a cooldown, the remaining timer on your defensive is reduced by that amount. Meh, it's fine. Too niche to do much most times. It's helpful if you have like a bunch of these loot items, you can like really reduce your defensive in a cool way, but it's not going to be like more than like Moss Shield. It can be handy if you're running like shenanigans with Timespace Dagger or something. Very rarely handy though. Not often helpful. Pocket Watch abilities with a global cooldown time less than or equal to 1.1 seconds deal 30% more damage. A lot of classes have something on their kit that does less than that has a I say a lot of classes. Like Bruiser and Hexblade both really appreciate this, and I think a few other classes do too. Most classes don't benefit from it at base, although they will benefit from it with Metronome boots, or if they grab like a Sapphire or Opal. Gonna get low B tier. It doesn't have any downside really. It just requires very specific items to be a very good global buff, or a very good 30% buff to something. So it's just a bit more niche, gonna depend on the character and the situation heavily. Nova Crown, your special's cooldown becomes 30 seconds. Every 8 seconds, this loot item reduces your special's cooldown timer to 1 second and charges it. It's good for making your special's cooldown longer. And it's also good because effectively treat it in most cases. Like your special has an 8-second cooldown and is always charged on when it refreshes, which is good. If you take that on like, if you take that on Ancient, it's crazy. But it's weird because it also doesn't like allow it to be reduced in a way. Because it becomes 30 seconds and then this just turns it into 1 second. So it's a bit weird. It has very quirky interactions with some things. Yeah, it has really quirky interactions with a lot of things. And it's kind of hard to explain. For most classes though, treat it as an 8-second special cooldown and a charge mechanic. I mean, the quirky interactions are typically positive, so it does go up there in how good it is. It goes pretty high up there, actually. I'd rather take it than a lot of these. Like right here. Black Hole Charm. Deal 200 damage to all enemies when you use an ability or loot item with a cooldown of 10 seconds or more. It's an extra time for every 10 seconds longer that cooldown is, up to 5 times. If you have Dancer Emerald Special, this item goes crazy. Yeah, Dancer Emerald Special is not the most balanced thing in the game, and it's really fucking funny. And I hope they keep it that way, because it's really fucking fun. Otherwise, it's alright. When you use your defensive, it's going to be 200 extra damage, but it's less easy to get going, and it's less good for most characters to start off with than Storm Petticoat, but it's probably better than most of these loot items as well. Because you can probably use either your special or defensive or something with a 10-second cooldown much faster than these. Plus, it also just has a better scaling cap than these. These don't really scale at all. This will scale. So it's cool. And if you're Dancer, then immediately move it up to low A tier and just hope and gamble you get a Emerald Special because it's really fucking fun. Twin Star Earrings, your primary and secondary have a 2-second global cooldown time. Deal 70% more damage. Awesome on Bruiser. Awesome on Heavyblade. I don't think any other class uses this very well. Awesome on must takes on 2 of the classes, don't get me wrong. Other classes not. The main thing is it becomes, it's not increases, it's becomes. And since it becomes that long, Heavyblade can just not really care because their global cooldown was already 2 seconds most likely. So I'd say this has a higher ceiling than Fairy Spear, but it's less accessible than Fairy Spear. I'm going to put it above Fairy Spear though. It's close to being an A tier. It's just not good enough for enough of the cast to be an A tier. All right, the Youkai set. I love this set. Kyo no Okumuji. Oh, no. Yeah. Kyo no Omikuji. I suck at pronouncing it. Whoops. All damage you deal is increased by 50%. Whoa, global increased damage 50%. Hold your horses. Percent chance triggers no longer happen, and you no longer hit for critical damage. So most of you might be thinking, oh, percent chance increases. They don't matter that much. There's only a few items in here. That's fair. There's a lot of items you miss out on, and obviously on like Dancer and like Wizard, you don't usually want to take it. Wizard can still take it if they spec right. But 50% damage increase is not a 50% damage increase. The reason why is the same reason that Queen's Crown is crazy. You have a 30% chance to critical hit, and critical hits are almost double damage. You can subtract about 25 to 30% damage from this item. This is a 20% global damage increase. Now that I've said that, how do you feel on it? Exactly, 20% global damage increase. That just went from S tier to eh. But I will say, 20% global damage for a not so bad condition still isn't bad. It still isn't bad. Just when you see your numbers at the end of the game and you're like, huh, why aren't my numbers that much higher than usual? Don't bother being confused like I did. It's because you aren't getting critical hits anymore, and critical hits are just really integral to the game. I rank it A tier, mostly because most classes can take it, and most classes don't mind taking it, and 20% damage increase is 20% damage increase across the board. Youkai Bracelet is a neutered version of this. All your attacks deal, all damage you deal increases by 40%. Your attacks no longer have randomized damage or hit for critical damage. It doesn't disable any of these percent chance effects, which is good. But it is 10% less than Okinokuji, which we already said was 20%. So this is 10%. 10% global damage increase. Not bad. I'm not taking it as often as most of these good ones, though. 10% global is almost right there, I'd say. Yeah. It's not bad. Depending on who you're playing with, what the party's composition is, it could be better than these global increases. I don't think it's better than most of these cursed items, I'm going to be honest. But it's still pretty good. 10% global damage increase is not bad. And if you pair it with Okumuji, then it's actually way better than it seems. Mostly because just having one of them negates the biggest flaw of the other. And so the other just becomes a free damage up at that point. Because that one already tanks your damage. So if you can combine them, awesome. Because having this one, you're already getting that 20% damage cut, maybe even a 30% damage cut from not getting crits. Adding on another 50% damage doesn't make that worse. It's just better. Oni Staff, your special deals 30% more damage. When a percent chance succeeds, your special goes on cooldown. Goes on an 8-second cooldown. Don't like this one very much, honestly. Put it right there. Yeah. Oh, not up there. Not up there. I'm very particular. Now, it goes low B tier mostly because a lot of classes that want to rely on special, wizard, dancer, they also rely on percent chances and just cannot take this. It's also just kind of clunky because it can lock you out of some very good builds with percent chance stuff because it effectively means you can't rely on percent chance stuff. And then the classes that don't really use special, like bruiser and heavyblade, that can run this, again, don't use special that much. That is being said, heavyblade can run special just fine, and it works pretty great. So Oni Staff is kind of good on heavyblade. Everyone else, it's like, it's just not accessible to a lot of the crowd. And the 30%, that is a very big ask for a 30% damage increase. Kappa Shield, your defensive has a 3-second shorter cooldown, but can no longer be reset by any ability or loot effects. 3-second shorter cooldown, but no longer be reset? Kind of mid, honestly. Like, actually, kind of down here with Hawkfeather Fan. For a similar reason as it makes your defensive a little bit better, but not really that much better. Like Wizard, 17 seconds versus 20 seconds, there's not that much of a damage increase there. And if it's not a damage increase, it's going to get you DPS checked. It's not like an invulnerability thing or anything that's super useful. It's really just defensive a little more often. And also it makes your defensive unable to be reset. And a lot of the better items do reset your defensive. I say better items, but they're also here in D tier like this. But a lot of the items that reset your defensive, like Lullaby Harp and stuff like that, that are actually like decent, just don't work well with Kappa Shield. So Kappa Shield's not great. Usagi Common, when a percent chance succeeds, gain a random buff for 5 seconds. Pretty crazy. Down here with these, has about the same payoff as Crown of Storms, honestly. Whenever you get a percent chance increase, you could either get 200 damage or you could get a random buff. And that random buff could be super, it could be Black Strike. On average, it'll work a bit better than On average, it's a bit crazier than Crown of Storms, in my opinion, but Crown of Storms is consistent, and that helps a lot. Not good on every class, but on like Dancer or Wizard, it makes your DPS better than like most of these A tier items. Not gonna lie. Red Tenzaku, miracles occasionally happen. I don't know every single miracle, but I know a lot of them. It can revive you upon death, full HP. It can block hits. It can give you 10 extra levels, you and your allies 10 extra levels after the end of each combat. And it can do quite a few other things. It can give you extra money. The reason I put it C tier is mostly the 10% chance, scaling with luck, to give you 10 extra levels. That is a 10% global increase to damage permanently. So it's like you just got a free B tier item. Only a 10% chance every battle, but if it happens even once, it's up here. The issue is it's not consistent. You can't rely on the 10% damage like you can there. Additionally, if you're playing alone, its value decreases, and it also depends when you get it. If you get it at the start, it's very useful, except it doesn't do anything at the start, and so you're probably going to get DPS checked. If you get it late game, it's not as useful because it doesn't have as many rounds to build up. That's kind of it for that. Vegas Spear. Vegas Spear is a bit weird. This is probably the item I'm least certain on ranking, but I still have a good idea of it. Your primary deals 70% more damage. Whoa, that's huge, and primary is huge, but gains a 7-second cooldown. Oh, that sucks. When a percent chance succeeds, cooldown resets. So you gotta think about the classes that want to use this, right? Dancer is like, oh, okay, I could use that, just spam my secondary to get a refresh. Dancer doesn't benefit from this too much because they don't do that much primary damage. Don't get me wrong, they still do benefit from it. Like, within doubt, it's still like an easy B tier item for Dancer. But like, Heavyblade is the one that wants this. Heavyblade, that's like, oh, that's double primary damage. Heavyblade doesn't have any percent chance effects built in. And the ones that aren't built in are unreliable. Bruiser, never take this. Sniper actually doesn't matter with it though. Sniper, since your cooldown resets upon hit, as long as you don't miss, it doesn't have a 7-second cooldown, so it's just a straight fire damage upgrade. I'm gonna put it with Obsidian Rod in my opinion. It definitely can do something crazy, but it's not consistent enough to do something crazy most of the time. Whereas everything in A tier is like significantly doing something crazy. Altair Dagger, your secondary deals 30% more damage. That's not much considering how low secondaries are, but we've talked about that. But its global cooldown becomes 4 seconds. Holy moly, is that bad? But when you use your secondary, it has a 90% chance to have a global cooldown of 1 second instead. Now it goes in F tier. The ways you make it work is if you get any of the luck boosting items, which keep in mind there's only 2, then the 90% chance turns into a 100% chance, which is handy because, okay, now it's a 1 second cooldown and 30% increase. That's not actually that much. Even if there was no downside, if it was literally just your secondary becomes 1 second global cooldown and does 30% more damage, it'd probably be like low B tier. Not even like up there with the greats. Just because it's not that crazy. You have Windbite Dagger, which is already doing very similar effect, except way better and consistently. The issue is it's not consistent and it needs things to make it work, so it goes in F tier. A lot of times I will actually skip taking it over not taking it, whereas like Butterfly Ocarina, fine, I'll take it. Whatever, who cares? These 2 items I will actually skip taking rather than being forced to take it. Haunted, what you need to understand is Ghost Flame. Ghost Flame does damage once when you apply it and does damage once when it ends. Kind of like Burn, but a little different than Burn. The Spear makes your primary apply Ghost Flame, but your primary now only does 10 damage, but instead it does 250 Ghost Flame damage. Effectively, the way you use this is if you only use your primary once or twice every 5 seconds, it's good. If you use your primary more than 3 times every 5 seconds, it's bad. And it also, of course, depends on the damage of your primary. If it's 1,000 damage and you only use it every 10 seconds, yeah, don't keep it. Use your better judgment. Is making your primary deal 10 damage really good? Is it worth about 500 damage every 5 seconds? In a lot of cases, it can be. So it goes in B tier. It depends on the character heavily, and it depends on your build you're running. Make your best judgment. Phantom Dagger, your secondary, now only deals 10 damage and applies Ghost Flame. Ghost Flame is the same strength as the primary one. This one is actually significantly better. In fact, even A tier. The reason why is because most classes, Heavyblade, pretty much every class that's not Dancer and every class that isn't Bruiser can appreciate this because they have a low damage secondary, but isn't going to do 500 damage in 5 seconds. Like, Sniper is not doing 500 damage in 5 seconds. Heavyblade is not doing 500 damage in 5 seconds with their secondary. Therefore, you want it because it effectively overwrites your damage in just a back-asswards way. And on average, primaries are better than they are than secondaries, hence why secondary is better. Cursed Candlestaff is the same thing. Special only is 10 damage. Now applies Ghost Flame. The Ghost Flame is 320, which is a little better. It's still kind of weird. A lot of classes don't want it. Bruiser wants it. Heavyblade can run it, and it will be a damage increase unless you are going for special or plan to go for special. Not many other classes can run it, though, other than those two, honestly. So I'm going to put it at bottom of B tier, because it can be crazy on those two classes, and it's very good on those two classes, A tier even. Literally sucks on every other class. Honestly, I'm more often taking Black Hole Charm, so, you know, specials are just a bit too good. Even if it is 640 damage every 640 damage every 5 seconds. You can't undermine it. 640 damage every 5 seconds is fucking crazy. Haunted Gloves. Abilities and loot that hit for 100 damage or less now hit for 100 damage regardless of other loot effects. It's good because, let's look at Dancer. Dancer has 2 attacks that hit for 100 damage or less, and now they're doing 200 damage. It turns Dancer into 200 damage special. It turns Dancer into 200 damage primary, 200 damage secondary, and that's crazy. And it's only amplified by number of hits in a way that is oftentimes better than the multi-attack thing. Oftentimes it is better than the multi-attack thing, but there's an issue with it. Or there's a caveat to it. It's not necessarily an issue. Just keep in mind that this is usually the last thing applied. So let's say you have Dancer and you have Haunted Gloves, and then you take up Shadow Bracelet. You aren't going to see the Shadow Bracelet at all, because the Shadow Bracelet's making you do 90 times 2, and 90 times 2 isn't 100, so it becomes 100. It does not become 130 times 2, unfortunately. But it's crazy on like Dancer or anything that has a below 100 damage hit. Heavyblade, it's not bad on. I should probably rank it a little lower, because while it's crazy on like Assassin and Sapphire upgrades, it's not as crazy on, say, Heavyblade. 40 extra damage on only secondary. Meh. But it does have a lot of cases it can be used to very good effect. And when it is used like on Dancer or something, it becomes A tier. Next we have Smoke Shield. Every 24 seconds, your defensive now grants Ghost. Your secondary no longer breaks Vanish or Ghost. Ghost slows you down and makes you invincible, but increases your damage by 60%. Ghost is weird because it slows you down. So the invincibility and slowdown kind of cancel each other, because you're like, oh, shoot, I have to get out of this attack. Ghost, activate. Invincible, get on my granny scooter down to the bottom of the screen. Kind of weird. The main thing is increases damage dealt by 60%. And your secondary no longer breaking Vanish or Ghost is good on like Assassin. It can be good on anyone, but eh. It gets to be a bit better than Diamond Shield, because it is Diamond Shield, except it does 60% damage on your next attack. Sure, you can keep attacking during Diamond Shield. I value Ghost a little bit more, just because I'm usually trying to use it for offense. Otherwise, I don't really use it. It's not that crazy. Ghost every 24 seconds is just a long time to wait for Ghost. Old Bonnet is kind of similar to Haunted Gloves. Abilities and loot that hit once now deal 250 damage, regardless of the loot ability effects. This item is going to get a solid low C tier. The reason why is because it doesn't have the or less clause. If you're doing 1,000 damage as Bruiser and you only hit once, congrats, you're doing 250 damage. This is bad because a lot of classes like Wizard, Dancer, they're relying on buffing up their special. You are now capping their special at 250 damage no matter what. And that's like, why would you do that? So that clause makes it much worse than wherever the hell I put it, Haunted Gloves. Makes it much, much worse. Heavyblade doesn't want it. 200, like, you effectively have to decide, is 250 damage the most damage I can do with my hits? If not, then don't take it. Even if it's like, oh, but now my Heavyblade does 250 damage on secondary. Sure, but now your primary and special are bricked. They'll never go anywhere. Made outfit afflicts surrounding enemies with Ghost Flame when you gain invulnerability. Same 250 damage. Slightly increases movement speed. Solid. Pretty dang solid. I put it at the same level as the primary inflicting one, because this one doesn't overwrite anything. You're still going to do your same damage. It's just free extra 500 damage upon defensive. 500 damage upon defensive is better than Storm Petticoat, but the Storm Petticoat has a higher ceiling because it doesn't have that within 5 seconds restriction. It can activate an unlimited number of times, whereas Made outfit's only going to be once per 5 seconds. That makes sense. I kind of stumbled through that, Porky Pigged it, but you get it. Calling Bell every 12 seconds afflicts surrounding enemies with Ghost Flame. 250 damage, 12 seconds. It's about as good as the made one. Because, alright, be honest, is your defensive 12 seconds? If not, take Calling Bell. Is your defensive 10 seconds or less? Alright, you can take Maid Outfit. They're about the same outfit. About the same level of good. That was a very clunky sentence. Gladiator Grandmaster's Spear, your primary's damage increases by 40%. Your special's cooldown increases by 4 seconds. Most classes don't care about special cooldown, and the classes that care about primary damage don't care about special cooldown really that much either. Heavyblade, if you pick this up, cool. You just don't go special. You can still use your special. You just take the 40% damage more. And yeah, 40% damage, it's better than Dragonhead by a lot. I put it right up there. It is close. It is actually probably the Stonebreaker staff for primaries. The issue is primaries are just less universal. But I'll still put it up there. Just keep in mind, primaries are less universal than special is. There's a few cases you don't want it, but those cases are pretty dang rare. Most times, if you're building primary, you don't care about your special that much. And hell, if you're dancer, you don't care about that special cooldown, so free primary damage. But yeah, only reason I want to put it lower is because, like, most classes just benefit way more. Like, even Heavyblade benefits from Stonebreaker. Like, they don't benefit from it as much as they benefit from that. It's just, Stonebreaker staff is just better. So I'm going to put it at A tier. Just know, on certain classes, it is the Stonebreaker staff of primaries. Primaries are just less universal. Teacher Knife. Your secondary damage increases by 40%. 2 seconds of cooldown is added to your primary. Bottom of B tier. I don't have a ton of experience with it. 40% secondary. Not many classes care. Not many classes do care. Yeah, I'm sneaking it down there. 2 second primary. Not many classes care about that either. Usually it's just like a who cares situation. On Heavyblade, it becomes bad because it's like, you actually don't want that 2 seconds very much. Like, the 2 seconds doesn't really matter, but neither does the 40%. And so why would you even do it? It can matter on some builds, though, I should say. If you're running a rare secondary build, then sure, it matters. Just not that much. I say not that much as in, like, it does matter a lot. It's just not that often where it matters. Tactician Rod, your special damage increases by 30%. 2 seconds of cooldown is added to your secondary. Some classes don't like this, but most classes do like this. Most classes do like this a lot. And 30% is a pretty big increase. It's not enough that it's going to absolutely carry you, but it is enough to where it's like, okay, it's going to make that DPS check a lot easier to hit. Keep in mind, this tier is, it will effectively carry you to a DPS check, or through a DPS check, or it has some other equal effect. This tier is more like, it does a lot of damage and helps you on a DPS check. Spiked Shield, when an ability or loot or effect erases projectiles in a radius around you, deal 300 damage to that radius as well. Effectively, this is going to be when your defensive applies. It's just a worse Storm Petticoat. It does 50 more damage than Storm Petticoat, but it has A, range, B, even more specific conditions, which is usually like defensive and like one other effect, or a few other effects, I should say, but it's still not great. Still, I'll take it probably over Black Wakasashi, and I'll honestly take Candlestab over a lot of these too. I'll take Pocket Watch over a good amount of these as well. I'll take that over that. Okay. Now we're kind of getting this more lined up. Battle Maiden Armor, using your defensive will reset loot and ability cooldowns with less than 8 seconds left on their timer. I've really never found a usage for this. I'm trying to think. Most things it just doesn't apply to. At best, it resets your special every time you use your defensive. And that's not that crazy. It genuinely isn't. I'll put it below all of these. Put it below that. Yeah, no, it's not that. Genuinely, there's a lot of times I'd rather take health ups than it. Genuinely, I think that has a better chance to be good. Same with that. There's just not a lot of situations you want this. There's probably some loot relic which you're going to be like, oh, but if you have this one item, yeah, if you have this one item, and I guarantee it's because that item is more pog than this item right here. Most items don't activate. Sleepy Greatbow I'd activate. Fantastic. Sleepy Greatbow activates every time I do my defensive. This is 300 damage when I do my defensive. This is 250 damage when I do my defensive. Sleepy Greatbow is not that cool, man. It just isn't. At best, you get like a special reset every time you use your defensive. I don't think it's that crazy. There is a build there which I'm sure makes it crazy. Gladiator Helmet, abilities and loot that have cooldowns do 20% more damage. The important thing to distinguish is loot as well. It's kind of like a better version of Dark Cloud Necklace, in my opinion, because it's more general. It applies more often. It is better than Night Guard Gloves usually, because typically the ability that you're using is your special, and typically that has a cooldown. And then if you're heavyblade and you take like Dragon Spear, if you take Lancer Gauntlets, cool. It's also handy. Plus, it also affects loot, which makes it better than even Youkai, in my opinion. Because affecting loot is like handy. It's like a global 20% damage that also affects loot. It's kind of crazy. Lancer Gauntlets is all damage is increased by 30%, so like truly global. Your primary and secondary gain cooldowns of 2 seconds. Doesn't usually matter. Usually you're alternating them in your rotation, going primary, secondary, special typically. So it's just global 30% damage. It is huge. A tier because it's global and it honestly helps me just as much, if not more than Omi no Kuji or whatever. Which, keep in mind, is another 30% global. Don't underestimate 30% global. The only reason Demon Horns isn't up there is because it makes their defensive not work. But yeah, usually won't matter in your rotation because your global cooldown time is going to be 1.2 seconds on almost all your abilities. So 1.2 plus 1.2 is 2.4. 2.4 second cooldown overrides the global cooldown, overrides the 2-second cooldown, and it'll effectively never come into play. Lion Charm deal 180 damage to nearby enemies when an ability or loot with a cooldown is activated. So it's kind of like your special does an extra 180 damage, so you might be thinking, oh, it's as good as Kunai. And yeah, it's almost as good as Kunai. The only thing is, it's an area around you. But it doesn't only apply to your special, it also applies to just like other cooldown related things, like your defensive. It applies to loot. It's crazy with Lancer Gauntlets. That's cool. Crazy with Dragonhead too. That's cool. It has a very high ceiling, and it's pretty usable on anyone. You can get a free, 340 damage off of it, 360 actually, damage off of it, just by using your special and defensive near someone. And so, honestly, as a base item, I'm never disappointed to see it. Spark set. I actually don't like the Spark set much. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Sparkblade set. So Spark is like poison, except that it hits all enemies. So if you apply poison to an enemy, it only hits that enemy. If you apply Spark to an enemy, it'll hit both enemies. Better in multi-attack fights because obviously, if you have Spark on 8 enemies, now you're doing way more damage, which is kind of cool. It's cool, but it doesn't actually usually end up doing more than 40 damage in a fight, minus Tasha and the Maddie fight. Those are the only fights where it really matters. Blue Bolt Staff. Your primary applies Spark. Your primary applies 20 Spark. That's about it. It goes really just tied with the primary stuff. There's a small distinction where I would say the poison is better, but it's like Lapis Sword. Your secondary applies Spark, 20 Spark. You know the drill, right in there. Shockwave Tome. Your special applies Spark, 30 Spark. You know the drill, again, just right in there. Battery Shield. Every 30 times you or debuffs you apply deal damage to an enemy, your defensive resets its cooldown. Honestly, worse than all of these, even. These have a much better usage. I'm gonna be honest, these need to go up to here. These, it's just not that crazy. Resetting your defensive cooldown randomly is iffy. On a lot of classes, you're going to use it. Or on a lot of classes, your defensive will be charged when this activates. And if it's not, what if it only has 2 seconds on your cooldown? If it has 10 seconds, then it's nice. It's just the amount of times it helps you is just really, really limited. Raiju Crown. Every 20 times you or debuffs you apply, deal damage to an enemy, apply Spark to all enemies. The Spark is 40 this time. I'll say it's every 20 times. It's fine. One thing to keep in mind with this is while it seems crazy, you can't double stack. Same thing with Compound Gloves, which is actually really where I'm about to put it. Same thing with Compound Gloves, you cannot double stack. This means that you aren't going to have permanent decay or Spark on them. It means there will be some off time when you get it off. For example, let's say I have 1 second left of Spark, 1 second left of Spark, and I reapply this damage. It doesn't give me 5 seconds of Spark left, as far as I can tell at least. That's just not how debuffs work. Static Shock Earrings. Every 10 times you or debuffs you apply deal damage to an enemy, deal 150 damage to all enemies. This one can actually be alright. This has some builds around it, and I think a build around it would be really fun. I did not mean to put it there, but it can be alright. I think builds around it would be really fun. I just haven't really seen any crazy builds around it. I mean, I've seen the theory crafting for it. You just never end up getting it when you need it. And most times it's oh, it's a minor damage increase. But I say it has a high enough ceiling, it's better than these. But if it's in the first area, it's not something I would take over these, if that makes sense. Also, it's worth noting, divas from different sources do stack. So your Flame Blade, your Meteor Staff, your Specials Fire Burn, if it has it, and Primary Burn can all stack at once. You're going to be just fine. Just an important distinction I wanted to make. Storm Dance Crown, every 40 times you or debuffs you apply, deal damage to an enemy, gain invulnerability for 5 seconds. Again, it's too random. It just happens at a really random time, so it doesn't help. It's even more random than the ones where it's like when you use your defensive. It's just like, it could be any moment. You might not need it at all. Doesn't help with DPS checks either. Black Bolt Ribbon, every 50 times you or debuffs you apply, deal damage to an enemy, deal 1,200 damage to all enemies. Big damage, if you consider that most classes deal like 1 instance of damage every second because of global cooldowns, not every class has multi-hit attacks, not every class has like debuffs, whatever the hell, then it is way worse than Night Star. But it does get better as you get faster at attacking, and or if you have multi-hits, and or if you have debuffs. So that's where it is. It's the same thing as the earrings. It could make a crazy build. I just think the earrings are still better though. Alright, Crane Katana. Gain flow strength every time you move 15 rabbit leaps, and flow strength makes your primary deal 70% more damage. 70% is a lot of percent, but it happens at kind of random times, and flow strength is not useful for every class. I'm still going to put it low B tier because for the classes that it is useful for, awesome. Bruiser, great. And heavyblade, great. It's just hard to plan around because you can't just stop moving for the whole fight. Falcon Feather Dagger, gain flow dex every time you move 15 rabbit leaps. It does the same thing, but for secondary instead of primary. This one actually just kind of sucks. Mostly because primary is used way more than secondary ever will be. And secondary is not used much at all. So it goes right up here. I'm sure there's instances where you'd use it, but not a lot. Gain flow int every time you move 15 rabbit leaps. Flow int is just special equivalent of flow strength, flow dex. Special is used more often than both of them. And so that one actually does go a little higher. I put it up there personally. It doesn't have as high of a ceiling as some of these below it, I should mention. These might not be completely in order within rank. Also another good note. I try to keep them that way, but there's so many. Obviously, some I'm going to realize, oh man, Usagi Common should probably be above Bloodfire Brooch. Am I going to spend the time making it perfect? No, fuck you. I will say that this has a better... Like, Crown of Storms isn't useful for every character. This is fairly useful for almost every character, and you can play around it with almost every character. Anywho, Cloud Guard. You gain invulnerability for 5 seconds every time you move 25 rabbit leaps. See, literally every defensive effect where it's like, it's random, it doesn't help you when it needs to. No. Hermes Bow, every 10 seconds, fires a projectile at your target enemy that does 250 damage. Cooldown resets every time you move 10 rabbit leaps. Not better than these ones. Same as all the other loot. Talon Charm deals 150 damage to all enemies every time you move 5 rabbit leaps. About the same as Hermes Bow, I'm not gonna lie. It's a bit better than Hermes Bow. Kinda. Depends on your playstyle. Really doesn't matter though. Take whichever one you like. Tiny Wings dramatically increases movement speed. This one's actually not a bad one. This one can go into B tier above... Right there's good. It's good because it cancels out a lot of the slow effects, and if you're playing a slow character or you've picked up a lot of items that slow you, then awesome. It'll help you avoid some attacks. It can make the game playable again. Feathered Overcoat maxes out your movement speed while you're invulnerable. This is just random movement speed increases, so it doesn't help very much. It does have some use, but I don't rank it very high for that use, I'm not going to lie. It also doesn't do anything for your DPS. I wish it gave a significant movement speed increase on top of that, but I mean, Sacredflame said, Sand Priestess Spear. Your primary has a 40% chance to grant you Flash Dex. Flash Dex is the next time you attack with your secondary, it deals 150% more damage, but if you use a different attack but isn't your secondary, it wears off anyways. So it kind of forces you have to use your secondary next, and if you do, you get 150% more damage. Important distinction. The way this game works, 150% more damage is 150% more damage. Don't get confused and think, oh, flow strength is 70% damage? That's way more than 150 more damage. No. 150% is bigger than 70%. I forgot that because I am very used to, alright, 100% of my damage is my damage. Adding on 70% is 170%. This game doesn't work like that. I just got a little confused, so I figured I'd give an addendum. This is more than flow strength by over double. So, don't get me wrong there. So, 40% chance. It's a good chance. It's almost 50-50. The issue is flow strength. I mean, flow dex is not that good. It can be crazy though. So I'm going to put it in high C tier. It depends on your character. Most times, you aren't relying on secondary damage, but it's really nice when you hit it. I mean, even heavyblade, 150%, that's a 200 damage secondary hit. Is it crazier than like most of these loot items? No. But that's just base heavyblade. It does have a higher ceiling than most of these loot items. Flame Dancer Dagger. Your secondary has a 40% chance to give you flash strength. Flash strength is just primary instead of secondary. It's way better because you can be playing heavyblade and holy moly, I just charged up my primary and special with my secondary and now I have flash strength. Let's kill you now. This one's pretty crazy, yeah. This one gets to go, it's high up there. It's only for one attack, but it makes that attack huge for burst damage. Somewhere around that area. Good for primary users. Not bad for not primary users, though, either. No downside to it, really. White Flame Staff. Every 2 times you use your special, gain flash strength. I like this a little bit more than Flame Dancer, but both have been serving me very well recently. It's very handy to have, like, even on a special-based character, 150 damage, even on Wizard's base 200 primary, is huge. That's 500 damage primary. Good stuff. And so, it's not bad. This one's a bit more consistent if used on, like, Heavyblade as a pseudo Garnet. These effects do stack, if I'm correct. So, if you can somehow get, like, Heavyblade Garnet, then, yeah, they're going to stack, if I'm correct. Might be mistaken, though. Sacred Shield, every 2 times you use your defensive, gain Flash Int. My issue with this is it doesn't recharge your special. If it Flash Int, I should mention, is just special variant of flow and, well, not flow, but strength and dex. It's just special variant. But it is still 150% special damage. I just can't rank it as high as these, personally. I have a really hard time doing that, because your special isn't always charged, and when it's not, it's, like, kind of useless. But, personally, I still think it's a low B tier. I mean, 150% is crazy. Like, seriously, 150% on top of all your other modifiers is crazy. Even just doing 500 damage, you're now doing like 1,250 damage at base. Don't get me wrong, it's crazy. It's just typically it's every 30 seconds because of how defensives work and the cooldowns on them. Marble Clasp, every 5 times you use an ability, gain Flash Dex. It's fine. Flash Dex is still crazy. I don't like it as much as Sand Priestess Spear, honestly. I don't end up taking it very much because it's just fine. I'd rank it about with everything else. Like all this, like, just random loot damage tier, I guess. Oops, that doesn't matter where it was moved. Sun Pendant is actually kind of awesome. Sun Pendant, every 10 times you use an ability, reset your specials cooldown and gain Flash Int. That's what we were looking for. 1, every 10 times you use an ability. For a lot of classes, that's every 10 seconds, compared to your defensives, 30 seconds to get 2 defensives out. Average of 30 seconds. This one's an average of 10 seconds. That's not bad. Plus, Flash Int is just Flash Int. That's all I have to say. Plus, it resets your specials cooldown is what I was getting at. So it's going to always, your special's always going to be charged when you use it. It is always ready for you. This thing is awesome. This thing is low A tier for sure. I like it a lot. Tiny Hourglass, every 24 seconds, deal 1,000 damage to all enemies. Happens 4 times per battle. Literally just Night Grimoire, but it only happens 4 times. It's not crazy at all. Let me see. I'm kind of thinking about moving Sun Pendant up because there's 2 aspects of it. 1, it resets your special. 2, it huge buffs your special. Like, don't get me wrong. It's almost on the level of Black Strike. It's up there, man. It is up there. 1, it resets it. Yeah, I'm putting it in S tier. And I feel like people sleep on it a lot. 1, it resets your special. And for a lot of classes, that's very important. A lot of times you can time it in a way and it is valuable enough to time. A lot of these, the reason I say it's not worth timing it is because you're going to get a very small damage buff. If you're ancient and you time this well, you can get back-to-back specials, and one of them will do 150% damage, which is crazy. That's like almost as much as Black Strike. It's a little less than Black Strike, but it's charging your special for you, so it's always ready, whereas Black Strike is not always ready. So yeah, these are in no particular order. I mean, if I had to order them, I think this might be top, but maybe not. But yeah, no particular order there. Last one is Desert Earrings. Every time you gain a buff, gain another random buff for 5 seconds. About as good as Usagi Common, a little bit better. Usagi Common is only good on percent chance builds. This one is good on any build. It's not the best, but if you have anything that gives you a buff, it's all right. It's good because every class usually has a buff, and many people will be giving you buffs. So it can go crazy. Don't get me wrong. The Rune set, I love the Rune set. I know I've said that about a few sets, but you can tell when I really like them, I hope. First one is Giant Stone Club. Primary deals 70% more damage. Its global cooldown is increased by 0.6 seconds. Movement speed is moderately reduced. You're going to have to get over movement speed reduction. It's definitely survivable. It's not enough to where it's like not survivable. 70% permanent damage is 70% permanent damage. For primary users, this is the alternative to Dragonhead Spear. There's a lot of ways to override it. Metronome boots, rage if you're bruiser. Even if you can't override it, it's still a great damage boost. But I don't consider it better than Dragonhead Spear. I should note. Rune Sword or secondary deals 100% more damage. That is double. Its global cooldown is increased by 0.8 seconds. Movement speed is slightly reduced. Probably fit it in somewhere. I just don't ever take it. The reason I don't ever take it is because, again, most times your secondary is used to charge into something. If you can increase your secondary's damage without slowing it down, awesome. But since the global cooldown is increased, if you actually do the math, it's not crazy. It genuinely isn't. The reason that Great Club is crazy is because, oh, who cares? If I'm doing 1,000 damage, now I'm doing 1,700 damage. Yeah, that's crazy shit. Whereas this, it's like, oh, I'm doing 60 damage, 70%, well, 100%. Cool, now I'm doing 120 damage, but you're kind of bricking the rest of your build unless you are a specific secondary build, and secondary builds are just hard to accomplish. Mountain Staff, you know it, you love it. I love Mountain Staff. Your special deals 200% more damage. That is double damage. Actually, that's more than double damage special. It is triple because it is 200%. And I at first was like, oh, it's just double damage. No, it's triple damage. It goes hard. It's a easy S tier. Pretty much any class can take this. Oh wait, I didn't finish reading it. Its global cooldown is increased by 2.5 seconds. Movement speed is moderately reduced. Yeah, movement speed sucks. 2.5 seconds increase for 3 times damage. Honestly, it's not usually a bad trade-off. I will say with Mountain Staff, on something like Dancer or Wizard, while it is a always take, it won't actually increase your DPS that much. Because effectively, now you have a 2 times longer global cooldown for 3 times damage. You are getting benefit, not as much benefit as like anything else on this list, but its ceiling is higher than pretty much everything on this list because it is going to augment your damage in a different way than almost anything other than like Stonebreaker Staff. So that is my addendum. I have still taken Mountain Staff and then have been like, oh, I'm running into DPS checks, but also my best builds always include Mountain Staff. Usually my best builds are like 2 of these things combined. Either these 2 combined, maybe these 2 combined, maybe this and this combined, this and this combined. Regardless, it's an always take for every character other than Bruiser. Literally every character other than Bruiser wants it, which is funny. Some characters do better, like Ancient. Ancient, this is like a beyond S tier. Like, I just fucking bloopered that. It's good. It's good on literally every character, and that's why it's S tier. But just be warned, it won't always carry you to the DPS check, but I'm not going to lie. I will take it over every single item in A tier, no matter what character I am. Just because its cap is so high. Its ceiling is just so high. Except for if I'm like a primary build, then I might consider some of these more primary focused options, but yeah. Boulder Shield. Every 30 seconds, using your defensive will grant all allies Stone Skin. Reduces your movement speed slightly. Not gonna lie, this one has came in clutch. If you think about it, Stone Skin is almost like invulnerability for 5 seconds. Because you're only going to get hit 1 more time in 5 seconds. So it is at least as good as those, but it grants it to all allies, which is where it's a little bit important. I'm not going to try to argue it's crazy or anything, but I've taken it, and it has actually worked for me very well, and it saved a lot of my allies. Because 5 seconds is a long time to whiff an attack. And if you're good at noticing, oh, I have Stone Skin, you can oftentimes be like, all right, I'm going to whiff this attack, most likely. Let's just run into it and gain some iframes from Stone Skin. Because Stone Skin does give iframes and deletes projectiles around you. Pretty good. Golem's Claymore. Every 20 seconds grants you Stone Skin for 5 seconds and then slices the air around you, dealing 500 damage to nearby enemies. Also slows your movement slightly. Not gonna lie. If you're playing solo, you might not swap these. If you're playing multiplayer, you might swap these. That's what I'm saying. The party Stone Skin doesn't help as much, but Stone Skin is huge. The reason it's here is 1, it just does as much damage as every other loot, except more, honestly. Okay. Not more. It does as much damage as every other loot, and it honestly makes you invincible 1/4 of the time. Things don't hit you immediately. When a slow moon is chasing you, typically it chases you for like 5 seconds, and that's a lot of time for you to decide, all right, is Stone Skin gonna proc soon? Is it procking now and I can just quickly run through the moon? It's very nice. Slows your movement speed slightly is kind of a downside, but it saves you from a crazy amount of damage. Stoneplate armor is literally just better Red Dragon. It's Red Dragon, but the developer actually like popped off making it. I don't like Red Dragon is just bad, and then this one is just good Red Dragon. Granite. Okay, let me start from the beginning. Start each battle with Granite Skin. Might be thinking, oh, it's just Stone Skin. It's a little bit different from Stone Skin. It shields you from damage once, just like Stone Skin. Slows your movement dramatically, just like Rockdragon. I think Rockdragon slows you a little less. You're going to take damage with this on. But it shields you from damage and increases damage by 20%. This has no cooldown, so effectively treat it like Holy Mantle, aka protects you from one hit. Until you take damage, you have a global 20% damage boost, and it protects you from your first hit of damage. It's going to make it a lot easier to take that first hit of damage. The reason it makes it easier to take that first hit of damage is because you're really, really slow. But it wears off. Like, the slowness isn't forever. It's not built into the item, it's built into the status effect. Like, if Red Dragon was, while shielded, you're super slow, okay, maybe we're cooking. Remove the cooldown a little bit, and maybe we're cooking something up, and we can put that into C tier. Even just not being slow with Red Dragon, I'd put it into D tier, honestly. This thing giving you both a damage upgrade, global damage 20% is not awful. Like, if you really think about it, how much different is it from Amethyst Bracelet, except this one recharges on fight and shields you from damage, Amethyst doesn't. Now, am I silly enough to say it is better? No. Am I goofy enough to put it up close, though? Hell yeah. I love it. Yeah, that's about as far as I'm willing to go, because it's not going to last you the whole fight, and you're going to take damage when you have Granite Skin on, but it's going to last you usually 1/3 or half the fight, depending on how skilled you are with slow movement. And also, if you have anything that like speeds you up or helps your speed, Granite Skin is just awesome. It's just a global 20%, and it does become better at this point, but it's got a good ceiling. Global 20% damage is awesome. Just keep in mind, if you have speed items, it'll be really cool. Yeah, that's about it. Sacred Stone Charm. Abilities with a global cooldown time equal to or higher than 1.5 seconds deal 50% more damage. So this is pretty good. It falls in a similar situation as Pocket Watch, in my opinion. The buff is better than Pocket Watch, but it needs to be, because Pocket Watch is buffing a already very strong thing because it has a very low global cooldown, whereas this is buffing a very slow thing. Works really well with Mountain Staff and what's it called? Also works crazy on Heavyblade. Works pretty good on like Wizard for the extra 50% primary damage. It's not like the wildest thing, but 50% damage is significant. So pretty good. Not much else to say about it. Clay Rabbit, every 12 seconds, standing still will give you Stone Skin for 3 seconds. Don't mind it. It's Shinobi Tabi, but worse by a lot. Because Shinobi Tabi does so much else. Like, I can't overstate how much Shinobi Tabi does compared to like this item where it's like, oh, shields you from damage once within the next 3 seconds, is it? Yeah. Make it 10 seconds and you might be cooking. 10 seconds would be busted, but still. You get what I'm saying. A lot of times I want it less than health. But it's not awful either. It can definitely save you. Put it right around there. Call it good. Saves you from damage sometimes, but it's not super consistent, especially because you have to stand still for a whole second, and sometimes you don't have a whole second. Waterfall Polearm. This is our last set of how many? 8. Awesome. I'm a guy who loves 8s myself. Cobblestone 8888. Waterfall Polearm, every 10 seconds when you use your primary, gain flow strength, which is 70% more primary damage, for 5 seconds. So 50% of the time, you will be having 70% more damage on your primary. A lot of people will think this is really good when I feel like it is not good for them. I see times where people play Heavyblade and they're like, oh, but I can just spam primary now. You can, but you got to keep in mind where Heavyblade's going to go. A Heavyblade primary build wants a few things. They want defensive to supercharge it. They might, if they don't have defensive to supercharge it, might want secondary to charge it. Then they also want to have, say, one of these upgrades for their primary. Doesn't really matter which. All of them scale horribly with it. Lancer Gauntlets too. All of them scale pretty badly with it. Well, Lancer Gauntlets not as much, honestly, because Heavyblade has such a long cooldown anyways. And you're oftentimes going to want Garnet to give yourself flash strength on your primary. Now, you have 5 seconds. 5 seconds On average, if you're running a primary build, you probably have a 2-second global cooldown. If you're spamming, and I mean spamming your primary, you're going to get 2 primary hits in. It's actually not that goofy. I'm not going to lie. It's not as crazy as people think. 2 primary hits in is not that crazy. And oftentimes it doesn't work because, all right, if you have a 3-second cooldown, you're still getting 2 in, but that just doesn't work well. If you have this, you might get none in, but you'll still probably get 2 in. It just still doesn't work well. Additionally, if you have flash strength, forget it. You're probably only going to get like 1 or so in. So people misunderstand this as I'm going to get like 5 primary hits in and it's going to be fucking Omega Pog. When really it's like you're going to get 1 primary hit for 70% damage. Is that better than flash strength, which is double the buff? Fuck no, it's not. It's genuinely just not. So obviously you kind of can guess my ranking for it. It's not going to be like above this. I know a lot of people are like quick to put it in A tier because the buff is very easy to apply, don't get me wrong. But keep in mind it's after your first attack. So if you have any charge, any flash, any crazy buffs like that, this isn't going to stack with it. It has such terrible buff stacking, but it isn't actually as crazy as people think. For example, let's say you have Omega Charge. You can't stack this with it because when you use your primary, Omega Charge wears off, cool, and now this doesn't do anything. Let's say you want to use it with Black Strike. It is literally incompatible because to use Black Strike, you're going to need your secondary, and then to use this, you're going to need to use your primary once. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So this actually doesn't work with many buffs, and at most, you're going to be using it like once in a row. Now, Bruiser it's cracked with. Heavyblade, I very much disagree with this on Heavyblade. Not like it's bad. For Heavyblade, this is still a B tier item, not a bad pick. Heavyblade doesn't have a bad time just spamming primary. They genuinely don't. Check it in the DPS menu. Literally just sit there and spam click primary, and you're still going to hit 200 DPS. Funny? Yeah, kinda. Just a very long tangent on this item because it's way overrated in my opinion. I know it seems goofy, but me and it have a history. I've explained why it's bad. It just doesn't have good stacking with anything else. It's good as a standalone item, and it can carry you through the early game. It's just later on, it just doesn't do anything, and oftentimes you don't find yourself using it. Like, if you do the math, most times if you have Garnet Special on Heavyblade, you literally are better off ignoring this item, because you're going to go primary into middle click. Well, I say middle click, I'm just doxing my controls, oh no. No, you're going to go primary into special, into primary again, and by that time it's mostly worn off. Not always, it kind of depends on your global cooldowns. It can depend on like if you have metronome boots. It does have some scaling with like metronome boots. My point is, as you can see, it doesn't scale well with any other buff. Literally any other buff, because most buffs are clear on use, which sucks. Vorpal Dow is literally the exact same thing, but flow dex. So every 10 seconds when you use your secondary, gain flow dex for 5 seconds. Flow dex is 70% more secondary damage for 5 seconds. Duh. Literally just worse than the primary one. You oftentimes aren't spamming your secondary, and oftentimes spamming your secondary is bad practice. I will put it worse than Occult Dagger by quite significantly. Yeah, just right down there with the other dagger. Not crazy. Jade Staff, I should say it's a little better than that, though. Because it's not like random. You can control it, which is nice. Jade Staff, every 2 times you use your special, gain Tranquility for 10 seconds. Tranquility deals 30% more damage, wears off when you move too far. By moves too far, this thing doesn't get you anywhere. I'm not going to lie. You can move 1 bunny length away from yourself. And by bunny length, I mean 1 character away from yourself. If you move 1 character away from yourself, that buff is gone. And it is every 2 times you use your special. So an average of 15 seconds on a good day. Now, obviously, it's kind of nice on like Hexblade. Hexblade, you get your last special hit with it. Whoopie-doo, that's not crazy. And it's not even like permanent. If you're moving while firing off specials, like Hexblade oftentimes is when like the Carsey fight is in, you just aren't getting anything. But in best case scenario, it is a 30% extra damage on 1 more attack. Like, maybe you found a way to go invincible and can just sit still. If you haven't figured out invincibility, it sucks. If you figured out invincibility, okay, it doesn't matter. You figured out invincibility. Congrats, you're invincible. You win the game. Like, no, this item sucks. It's tempting to go in F tier, but I know there's a build that's gonna use it and be like, oh, it's 30% global damage though. You just didn't use it with X invincibility item. And it's like, yeah, okay. If you have like super or something and you manage to line them up correctly, it becomes a mid item. as like mid item. Still D tier 100% though. Because like I've tried it out because I'm like, oh well, it could be good if it's like moves slowly. Nope, it's really bad, really really bad. Honestly, yeah. There's less cases I would take it than even Granite. Fucking not less cases I take it than that though. So it can go about there. This item sucks. I see some people take it. Hey, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'd love to know. Whenever I've played around with this, you can go into Toolbox and play around with how like tight it is yourself. You're going to be moving most of the time to avoid attacks. You're going to have this buff for at most like 2 attacks, even on the fastest of builds. You're going to have this buff for at most 2 attacks, and it doesn't help. It's kind of hard to apply. Honestly, what I would do, make it to where whenever you've been standing still for more than 1 second, you do 30% more damage. Yeah, does that riff on Dark Mage Charm? Maybe. I'd make this one 20%, so it's kind of like a easier, more global, but it's not as specific and it's not as powerful as Dark Mage Charm. And I would make it whenever you stand still for 1 second, gain Tranquility. And that could be actually kind of fire. That would be really cool. Yeah. Anyways, Reflection Shield. When you erase projectiles in a radius around you, gain counter for 3 seconds. Counter, again, is 50% more damage, wears off when you use an attack. Literally kind of exactly the same thing as this Buckler, except it doesn't reduce your cooldown. Even without reducing your cooldown, though, 50% attack damage buff is very handy. God knows this is kind of fucked. I can't put flash strength below that. It's still kind of handy. Even though it doesn't reduce your special's cooldown, it's handy. On God, ignore most of like the rankings within tier. Just kind of focus on where they are on the tier. Like, okay, I fucking just contradicted myself. Oxymoron, I'm the moron. All right. What I'm saying is focus on the tier they are in, not where they are in on the tier, because it's going to depend on which character you play. Additionally, some even like go wildly like down depending on the character you play. Dancer taking Fairy Spear? Fuck no. Fairy Spear is like a D tier for them. Maybe a C tier, actually. I mean, the reason D tiers are there is because you don't take them on like any characters ever. Depending on your build and character, certain items do go up and down. Duh. Use common sense. This is more of like a general, alright, I want to get a Lunar clear. What items are going to be good? And like a general, hey, maybe you didn't think of this item. Like, I know I didn't think of Queen's Staff as crazy, and I didn't realize Mountain Staff could be taken on anyone. Sun Pendant, I slept on for so long because I didn't really understand percents. Same with both of these. Like, to me, this was like, oh, okay. It's about as good as like, I would have put it here a while ago. I did not realize how good 3 times damage is. It's wild. Anyways, Butterfly Hairpin, whenever you gain invulnerability, gain a random buff for 5 seconds. So most times it's about as good as Desert Earring, except Desert Earring has a way higher ceiling. So this one just goes like a little lower. Somewhere lower. Not anywhere like specifically lower. But Desert Earring and Butterfly Hairpin. Butterfly Hairpin is on average better early game. This is going to be better late game when you're getting more buffs up. Water Mage Pendant, every 12 seconds when you stand still, gain Flow Int for 5 seconds. Flow Int is again 70% special damage. Not bad. Since it's on standstill, it doesn't actually suffer from the Water Polearms. Water Polearm suffers from a really bad on activation chance. Well, on activation requirement. This one doesn't. I'm not good at using stop moving activation stuff, but I'm not just going to ignore like that you compare that with like Black Strike or you compare that with like Mountain Staff and it goes crazy. And so it is good. And a lot of classes can spam their special. For example, it works really well on, say, mostly just Hexblade. I'm not going to lie. I was trying to think of people more than Hexblade. It works really well on Hexblade. Use it on Hexblade. Yeah. 70%. It's about 50% of the time. It's going to be a lot of times when you're doing your special bursts. So if you're good with it, it's honestly just a permanent 70%. Almost permanent 70%. Issue is I'm not good with it. It's going to go somewhere high B tier. Honestly, I think it's about as good as... I think it's better than the other standstill charm by a lot. So, yeah. Raindrop Earrings. Honestly, you could argue it's higher, but you get the idea. Or you could argue that this is slower. One of them need to move away from each other because they are way... One is 30% more. Raindrop Earrings. Every 18 seconds when you stand still, gain repeat for 5 seconds. Repeat your special cooldown instantly resets upon use. So effectively, for 5 seconds, you can sit there and hold down the special button and spam its ass. I'm not gonna lie, I don't like it. It makes me think too hard when I play, and I don't want to think too hard. It is busted as hell. Imagine being ancient, and you can just sit there and hold down the special button as long as your global cooldown allows. Sure, that might only be 4 times. That's 4 fucking times you wouldn't have gotten it without it. It's not as good on like Hexblade or anything, but it's not bad on Hexblade either. Pretty good on every character, really. Even Bruiser, you can have a use case for it, because it's like, oh, free Berserk. It's about as good as Necronomicon on Bruiser, actually worse, but still. Has some use, which is kind of cool. You can take it on any class. It obviously has busted effects with like Bolt Staff, Kunai, Lion's Charm, Book of Cheats. All of those are busted with it. It's very good. Our final one is Aquamarine Bracelet. Every 12 seconds, you gain a random buff for 10 seconds. So effectively, you have a just random buff for 10 seconds. It can be super, it can be flow dex, it can be anything. It's honestly not so bad. I rather it than Smite because I think most buffs in this game are better than Smite and better than the damage that that's bringing to the table. I don't rather it than Stone Skin though. It just kind of depends what you get. It is luck based. If you already are running like gain another buff kind of deal, then sure, go for it. If you're running a buff build, it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's kind of handy. Sometimes it'll give you Black Strike. Keep in mind, if it gives you Black Strike wears off on hit. So a lot of the cool ones are going to wear off on hit anyways, which kind of sucks. Anyways, that's the end of a tier list, which is cool because my throat really fucking hurts. For those of you watching the YouTube video, feel free to tell me just how this looks. If you disagree at all, feel free to drop that down in the comments. I love discussions on that shit. Feel free to say, bro, Black Strike is actually shit. Black Strike sucks and you suck and all that, because it'll honestly make me laugh and it's fucking funny. Or tell me if I'm wrong, because like my opinions have changed a lot, but I feel very confident in this list because I've played with every item at least 10 times. Because goddamn, getting Lunar clears fucking takes a while. It takes a while to get good at the game, and like I could tell when my DPS was doing different. At a certain point, I had my DPS memorized for certain characters. I didn't just play with one character either. I played with 3. So, hell, I technically played with 4, but mostly 3. And they were different characters. Heavyblade is a lot different from Dancer, and it's going to want a lot different things than Dancer. So, yeah, I feel like I have a pretty general idea. If you play like Assassin or Sniper, maybe this kind of list sucks. I don't play either of those much. I've gotten Master Palettes on both of them. I've played them both sometimes. Defender too, but I feel very confident that like, yeah, Defender's just a similar class to Hexblade, where you're gonna want these little stretch of items because multi-hit, all that. Anywho, I'm gonna leave you be, or I guess leave you be. It's kind of weird.